Mr. Homerkeet?
Mr. Chairman, Joe Hammer is not here. Mr. Lambruni?
Here.
I am here. Mr. Brecklin?
Here.
Mr. Deane?
Here.
Mr. Drake?
Here.
Mr. Edwards?
Here.
Mr. Hughes is not. Ms. Gina Frito?
Here.
Mr. Orcolini is not. Anna Laurie?
Here.
Paul Thompson is not.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So everyone's seats tonight. Okay?
Yep.
Very good. All right. The first order of business is to determine if we want to switch here order. Kevin? Ken? You want to switch order because you don't have your attorney here? Or he just arrived? Okay. Oh, he's right there. All right, we're all set.
We actually we can take care of this one then first while he gets situated.
Where's the other guy?
Matthew Hock, he's the one who's special, he's not going to be here.
All right.
We have three.
Chairman.
So he's not going to, this is the one we're going to do with the zoning permit.
Yeah.
This is two public hearings.
All right, so first order of business is actually to dispense of an item that we didn't act on last time we were here. And just to refresh everybody's memory, the gentleman came, wanted to build a garage over 200 square feet. It was determined that he had a matter of right to build the garage without coming to us. I think the chairman last time asked that the zoning officer take a look at that and document something to that effect. I think we got a letter from him saying that this is okay and it's applicable. I guess he can build up to 850 square feet. So did we or did we not open?
We did not open the public hearing.
We did not. Okay, so at this point, there's really no action to be taken then, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So this is closed and we're done. Oh, where'd he go?
He was never here. Oh, yeah, so the, I'll grab him. We've got to put the screens on anyway and turn on the projector. So give me 1 minute and Richard and I will do that and I'll
Okay.
set them up and they'll be ready.
All right. Okay, second order of business is public hearing 220725Z, KCH Trading Incorporating seeking a zoning text amendment in accordance with section 10.1F, amendments to the zoning regulations of the Wethersfield Zoning Regulations to amend section 2.3, which is definitions, and add a new section 5.4 for warehouse supermarket adaptive reuse in the RC district. Our usual process here is to have the applicant make his presentation. We normally ask questions. There's some back and forth, and then we will open it up to anyone in the audience that wishes to speak, after which we'll give the applicant an opportunity to address anything that has come up in the questions with the audience, and then we proceed from there. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought you were going to have another public hearing before me, so, but anyway, I'm ready. As you know, we were here in March before you for a pre-application review regarding 1000 Silas Deane Highway, and at that time, we talked about a couple of things. We presented a conceptual site plan, and we also talked about a text amendment. And we're here tonight, not for a special permit application. That's not ready yet. Just for the text amendment. And since we're here just for a text amendment, my focus, I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to focus too much on the specifics of the site. My focus is on the text amendment in the abstract, and my goal is to try to explain why we think the text amendment is beneficial, not really for this site specifically necessarily, but generally and for the town. There's a few general points I'd like to discuss. I think the most important is that the text amendment is an attempt to address the challenge of what do you do where you have, and by the way, this isn't unique to 1000 Silas, Deane. We're trying to address the challenge of what do you do when you have an older industrial building, and again, 1000 Silas, Deane is not the only one, that's a fairly big building that takes up most of the site in a zone, an RC zone, that is targeted to retail. So in a site like this, you have a zone targeted to retail, an older building that just doesn't have the parking that most retail needs. So the question is, how do you permit a property owner to adaptively reuse a building like that and have a retail use, which is what the town wants under the RC zone in this area. And one answer is you try to identify retail uses that don't need much parking compared to other retail uses. And that's the basic idea behind the text amendment. Now, obviously, the owner of 1000 Silas, Deane, is in the grocery business. He'd like to, and has been operating an Asian-oriented supermarket there. And it happens to be a very unusual use, and I think it happens to dovetail well with those objectives. So that's one thing we're trying to accomplish here. Another thing, and so we've come up with this idea of a warehouse supermarket use that would be permitted in the RC zone, and it would have relaxed parking requirements. But in that regard, I think it's really important to stress that we're proposing parking ratios, but unlike the normal parking ratios, an applicant wouldn't be automatically entitled to those parking ratios. Those are minimum parking ratios, and it would be in the discretion of the commission to require any amount of parking between the minimum, the special minimum that would be applicable under this new proposed reg, and the regular retail parking ratios that otherwise would apply. And we would have to, any applicant would have to come before the commission and make the case that they need less parking, and that if they want to use the lower parking ratios, we would have to convince you on a case-by-case basis that that's appropriate for this particular use. Just a couple other general concepts that I want to stress, that, even though we call it warehouse supermarket, that doesn't mean warehouse. It's not really a warehouse. It doesn't mean warehouse in the sense of a distribution warehouse like a Cisco or an Amazon warehouse or any other, warehouse where goods are stored for distribution to other resellers. One thing that our proposed regulation makes very clear is that everything has to be sold to qualify as a warehouse supermarket use. Everything has to be sold to end users. Can't be other resellers. Has to be end users. Those could be consumers, and they could be restaurants, but they're end users, and that's important because we do use the word warehouse, and there is a lot of storage because of the nature of the use, but it's storage for goods that would either be sold at that premises or delivered directly from that those premises to end users. Another thing that I think is worth stressing in our proposed regulation is that, there's no perfect way. We're really talking about kind of a very unique kind of use, and there is no perfect way in advance to know what the actual parking requirements are going to be. My client is very convinced that there's plenty of parking on the site for his use, even though it's a pretty big building. But I've tried to build in protections for the town in case there's a problem, and the main protection is that the regulation allows for any special permit that's granted under the regulation to be conditioned on a later review. So you could say you have to come back in whatever period of time you pick, a year, year and a half, 2 years, and we're going to take a look at the parking. And, you know, the last thing my client wants is to not have enough parking. The last thing I think the town or my client wants is to have some kind of a parking problem. And if there is, the town should be able to address that. One of the features of the kind of use that would occur at this site, and that theoretically could occur at any site that's approved under this draft special regulation, should you see fit to adopt it, is that it, as I mentioned, it has more inventory stored on site than you'd have at a Stop and Shop or another, you know, a normal supermarket. And there's really a couple reasons for that. One is that the nature of this kind of warehouse supermarket use is that the operator buys goods in very large quantities in order to take advantage of price discounts, and he stores them there. You know, a lot of it is out on the sales floor on pallets, but some of it's in a back room that's not accessible to the general public. And the other reason that there's an unusually large percentage of inventory storage is because in the case of a mom and pop operation like this, there's only one store, so there's no, this is the only place they have to store their inventory. If you're Stop and Shop, you have your own distribution warehouse, and you buy food in bulk, and you store it in your warehouse, and then you ship it out to the different stores. That's not going to happen here. That storage of, we'll call it excess inventory, has to occur on the site. And the reason why that relates to the parking issue, which is sort of the main issue we're trying to solve for here, is that if you have, you know, 50,000 square feet of space, just hypothetically, and if a normal supermarket, you know, 95% of that would be sales floor area with a small stock room. But if, in this case, you have, let's say, only 25%, you know, only 50%, 25,000 square feet is devoted to sales floor, and the other half is storage, even though you have a 50,000 square foot, you know, you have 50,000 square foot being used for a supermarket use, it's more equivalent to a 25,000 square foot store just because you have all the storage. And those are the kind of factors that the regulation allows the commission to take into account at the time of a special permit application. Again, it doesn't require the commission to relax the parking requirements. It permits you in your discretion, after we've made the case, to do that. So another factor, and the final sort of main factor that's incorporated in the draft regulation, is that where you have a larger building like this, with a relatively small parking field, in order to be able to allow a property owner to adaptively reuse a building like that, there really does need to be an option that the owner has to just declare that part of the building is just not used. It won't be open to the public, it won't be used for storage, it won't be used for anything, and to have that not count against the parking ratio. Because, and that will be the case in this building, of probably about 30, 40,000, at least 30,000 square feet of the building just won't be used because it doesn't need to be used at this time. And that shouldn't count against the parking ratio because it's not being used. So our draft regulation provides for that, and I've prepared a revised version that fleshes some of these concepts out a little bit. That's what I'd like to talk a little bit about now. We received Mr. Elder's staff report on Friday, and we noted that at the end of that staff report, he had a series of suggested revisions for your consideration that could be incorporated into the proposed draft regulation. So what I did is I tried to, as best I could, take all of Mr. Elder's suggestions and incorporate them, and we've also spoken since, and I refined it a little bit. So I have here today a draft, a revised version, and I have a revised version in a redlined form that you can see on the screen. There's also a clean copy, and I'm hoping maybe Mr. Zhang can help me, can you help hand these out? Move it along. So what I'd like to do now is, again, I've kind of described the basic concepts, and most of them didn't change in the revisions. None of them changed. We just kind of refined them and fleshed some things out and added a little more detail. And if I may, I'd like to go through them.
Can I just ask you one quick question? Is this different from the version that Lynn sent out in email? We got an updated version, I think, either yesterday or today. That was redlined.
No, so the red line version that you have should be the same unless you updated it since you
Yeah.
sent it to Lynn.
The red line's the same.
Okay,
If
so
you,
Then you do have.
I didn't realize Ms. Rose sent this out because I did send the wrong version of the clean one. But if you look at the red line, that's the right one.
So we received that today.
Yep.
Right. And that's also what's being presented, just so folks from home can
Right.
see the
Right.
version that's being discussed right now.
Right. So there's 4 substantive changes. There's a number of non-substantive changes that were just meant to make the language a little better and correct a typo here and there and just make it a little better. I'm not going to belabor those. So the first substantive change is on page 1. It's up on the screen. And what we did is we removed what had been the old Section 3. And what the old Section 3 did is it created a new accessory use. There's a section in your regs that lists various accessory uses that applies generally to the regulations. And we added a new one, a new accessory use that was called storage of inventory. And I guess on second thought, the idea was that even though it was clear in that definition that it only applied in the proposed to the proposed new regulation that would only apply to warehouse supermarket, we didn't. There was a concern that might set a precedent, and somebody reading the regs might who doesn't have a warehouse supermarket or some other kind of use might think that, this applies to me. So we got rid of that, but we kept the concept. It's just that we put it in the new regulation rather than the part of the regulations that apply to everything. And if you look at the very top of the second page of the red line, maybe it makes sense. You can see this definition of inventory storage that it doesn't really change the concept. It makes it even clearer. That's junk. Warehouse supermarket is. And what the definition does, and again, this was in the other draft, but what it does is it makes it a couple things really clear. That the storage that's being talked about there is, as I mentioned before, it's only storage for goods that are sold on the premises or to be delivered directly to the premises to end users. And really, what I'm trying to do there is to make it really, really clear that this can't be a distribution warehouse, because that's not allowed in this zone. It's not what the town wants for this zone. It can't be, again, a warehouse where you distribute, a central warehouse where you distribute goods at wholesale.
Can I interject just a minute here? On the definitions, which is 514A, the paragraph there, I think you did a good job of modifying this. I read the first one and then I read this one, much clearer.
Okay, good.
And I do agree that having that item up front in 3 could be confusing for people.
Right.
So the fact that you took it out is great. I think that's the right approach. But in this description here, you talk about that this supermarket will have inventory storage, right? But it doesn't specifically say that this supermarket will also have reserved area, but in the end, you define the concept of reserved area. Is that confusing? I mean, I think the implication is that your regulation, you want to have the sales, you want to have the inventory storage, and you want to have the ability for dead space or reserved areas, right, for the future.
Right.
But you only introduced that in this definition, reserved area, but it's not specifically said that that's what the warehouse is. So I was wondering why you did that.
Well, we can certainly add a sentence to the definition of warehouse supermarket that addresses that. I mean, it is addressed in the very last section, which is new, section 4. And I guess I didn't, the reason I didn't include it in the definition of the warehouse supermarket is it's not really part of the warehouse supermarket use. It's just space. It's kind of like if you have a shopping center with multiple spaces, you know, you could have multiple uses in that building. And the idea behind the reserved space is that, I mean, it could be used in the future for an expansion of the warehouse supermarket use. It could be used for a totally different use. And that's the idea, and that's why I didn't include it in that definition, but we could certainly work on that. And I suppose...
Dave, what's your thought on that? Should it be specifically in the definition? Because they're actually looking for all 3 or not?
Grocery store is different from a superstore or a supermarket. Are you going to sell furniture, baskets, stuff like that, or is it just simply going to be considered a retail food store? That's the question.
It would...
And that's sort of what I was thinking of as well, is what's the difference between a grocery store and a supermarket? Because it seems like the terms have been used somewhat interchangeably, but there's an implication that they are substantively different.
In my mind, a supermarket is a subset of a grocery store.
So there's no other products other than foodstuffs.
And it's a food retail
what the
store.
definition says is other goods typically sold in supermarkets. So you could have, I mean, there are some things typically sold in supermarkets that aren't food. You could have, you could have plastic silverware. You could have, you know,
Dry goods?
so it could be
Paper.
some kinds of dry goods. You know, I didn't want to limit it just to food because other supermarkets are not limited to food. In my mind, a supermarket is just a grocery store that's big.
Yeah, because I mean, Stop and Shop sells lawn furniture. I mean, that's
Yeah.
That's where the edge gets. The one question I had was, you're more or less considering yourself like a Home Depot or a Costco where your store is a warehouse. So you have to follow the guidelines for the racking, the distances between, so forth and so on, the proper equipment. The question I have is, why do we have to call it, why can't we just call it a retail food warehouse? Or, because if you start, the one thing which you've done in this, which is good, is you've eliminated the fact that you're a food distribution service. Basically like Costco or Home Depot, I can go in, Costco's a little different. If you want to go see their inventory, you've got to get permission to go on the back sides of it. But it's the idea that, say I go to your store and I want to buy 2 pallets of noodles. You'll allow me to buy it and you'll deliver it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So it's not like you're going to have a warehouse in the back that I have no access to and you're distributing the food to other retailers. I mean, a restaurant is not a
Yeah, no,
food retailer,
that
but
is exactly right. But there is going to be storage that the public is not going to allow to have access to. And the reason why, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, we want to make sure that the sales floor area is small enough that the site can accommodate, the parking, so there's enough parking. And just the nature of this business is, and Mr. Zhang can explain it a lot better than me, but, and again, I'm trying not to get too much into the specifics of his use, but he just has a lot of goods that don't need to go out on the sales floor because he buys it in such big bulk. They just don't need to be out there. For instance, well, a good example is the cold storage. I mean, one of the big attractions of this building is, it was a former Weight Watchers food processing plant, and it has a fairly large cold storage area. And the idea is he would store things in there. The public wouldn't be allowed in there. He has another freezer section, and he would move frozen foods out of the cold storage area into the freezer section as needed, and that's just the nature of his business.
Okay,
Yeah, so if I think what happened, so I prepared comments based on the original draft, and one of the thoughts that I had is that part of the proposal includes a parking ratio based on the square feet of retail area. We know that as proposed, there's a large inventory or storage area, and I didn't want to completely eliminate that from having some sort of a parking ratio. In our current regulations, we do have a parking ratio for warehouses and storage facilities. It's not a large space, it's 1 space for every 2,500 square feet. So my suggestion was that we contemplate some proportional parking requirement for both the retail component, which I believe has changed from what was 2 down to 1.5, and the response to that comment was they're going to do, I think, half a space or 0.75 or 0.25 spaces for the inventory, which we can be discussed. But that is one of the responses, I believe, to my comment that we should somehow capture that inventory space. And then in addition to that, just thinking ahead, if you find buildings like this, right, this is not the only building, this could happen in any RC zone anywhere in town, right? And so if you have a large facility that you're not using all of when you start your business, if, for example, they wanted to rent it out, and I just used the example of a contractor storage, it's, we know there's a shortage, contractors seem right now to always need storage space. That would be a future use on the site. I wanted to make sure that whatever parking ratio we adopt or accept for the retail area and the storage area is in relation to the area of the proposed site plan, if and when we ever get there. But then if there was an additional use proposed, that reserved area or that other area, which is being proposed is defined as reserved area, we would be able to calculate that area at a future date based on the use that's proposed in the reserved area.
Okay.
And it is unique because generally, as the reason that this proposal is it intends to make use of a large former industrial manufacturing site. So they may not be able to accommodate or even know what a full site utilization would be on day one, and allowing the reserved area to be shown as a future use reserved area would allow us to determine that parking when it comes back. And that was the other suggestion I had, is how do we make sure it comes back? Because whatever we accept as an amendment for this use, if they come back and they propose to modify their site plan to add another use, we want to make sure that whatever parking ratio we accept as this, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the supermarket, the warehouse supermarket use. I want to make sure that if they ever propose to come back with another use on the site, that we're not living with that parking ratio. We're going to address the parking ratio that's specific to the other uses that they would introduce, if they
All right,
introduce one.
so that's in the middle there, when you say, in assessing parking requirements, the commission may also take into account portions of the building that compromise the reserve area. That's the sentence you're referring to, right?
It's
Yeah.
reversed, though. You know, I don't think that's just, you're not written it right. It should say, do not take into account reserved area. You're saying take into account.
In the future.
Well,
you said.
may, it says we may.
In the
Say
future.
may. Oh, but say, assessing park requirements, the commission may also take into account portions of the building that comprise reserved area, provided that no use may be made of reserved area space. Shouldn't it say should not take into account?
Well, I mean, I think we're all seem to have the same intention, but the intention behind that language was that when I say may take into account, there's area in the building that's not going to be used. It's, the idea was, you know, we didn't want to come in with a building that has 115,000 square feet of floor area on both floors, and to come in with a proposal where we contemplate using half of that, and then have the commission say, well, we want to make sure that there's enough parking for
But that's not what you're saying
150,000
here, though.
feet. Well,
Say you may take it, that's not what you want. You want to say does not have to take into account, not may. So we could or may not. We could sit here and say, well, we're going to take into account.
yeah, we can clarify that.
I'm just
Well,
saying.
I think the
I guess,
intention is
hold on,
exactly what you said.
You don't say that.
I'm confused by all this. It's clear to me that what you're proposing here is, for the actual sales floor, there's a minimum of 1 3/4, right? That's clear.
Right.
That's up front. And then if there's any inventory or storage, whatever you call it, space, that inventory space, you're suggesting has half a space for 2,000. So in this building, if you were to do all that, do you have enough parking just to do that? In your proposal that you're going to come down the pike with, if you apply that formula, do you have enough space on the site to satisfy those two criteria? Do you know that?
Yes, and actually, you can always make it work just by reducing the sales floor area so that it works. I mean, here's the math. The math is in very general terms. The proposal that's going to be made, you have a building that has 115,000 square feet in it, let's say. Our proposal will probably say, again, the exact plans are being worked out, it'll probably say we're going to have a sales floor area of about 40,000 square feet, which again isn't as much as Mr. Zhang would like, but it's probably what he has to live with for right now until he can get more parking. And we're probably going to have about 30,000 square feet of storage area. So if you apply these percentages, and there's room on the site for about 85, 86 parking spaces. So if you do the math based on the 1.75 space for each 1,000 square feet of
70, so you need 85 spots based on that.
So that works out.
So-
So I actually backed into the 40,000.
All right, so basically then, the space that I call dead space or future space, there's no parking for
It
that.
doesn't count.
But there's no parking available in the future for that.
Dennis, we all understand what you want to do.
Right.
And I know we have to
Yeah.
repeat this 25 times, but you don't say that.
Right. We'll
Clean up, you gotta clean up the words.
we'll
You don't
clean
say
up
that.
the language so that.
Yeah, I think the intent of the reserved, and this could be in my comment, is we wanted to make sure that space was going to be captured when someone came back. And it sounds like they don't actually need that as part of their proposal right now. But the idea was that if and when they decide to use that space for another use, that they would come back and it would have its own parking
Well,
requirement.
if they were going to ever use that space, they would have to come up with extra parking.
Yeah, and it so happens there is a
All right.
lot of extra parking right behind the building. There's a paved area, it's owned by Eversource. The reason it's paved is it had historically been used by Weight Watchers under a lease from CL&P at the time. And we're working with Eversource to try to get a lease. And if we can get that, that's going to generate, I don't know the exact parking count, but quite a few parking spaces that will make it possible either for Mr. Zhang to expand the area that he uses, or like Mr. Elder says, to maybe rent some of the building out for some other use, for, contractor storage or anything. But we don't have control of that parking right now, so we're just going to have to deal with.
So I think we understand your intent. So that's clear. What else? You said there were a couple of critical
Yeah,
changes.
so
What else do you have?
We've actually hit most of them. I mean, I did want to stress on the reserved parking that, as Mr. Elder says, we're trying to make it really clear that if we come back in the future and want to use some of the reserved area, we can't count any of the parking that's already there. We have to find new parking somewhere else. And the other point is that the parking ratio that will apply will be whatever it is for the use. If it's contractor storage, you look at the regs and figure out, what the parking requirement is, and we have to find the spaces somewhere. I mean, it could be on the adjoining property, it could be the Eversource property. I mean, in theory, you could demolish a corner of the building. I mean, it's even theoretically possible you could put some parking in the basement of the building. I'm not sure how practical that is, but again, those would all be the options. And if there's not the parking, there's not the parking, and we just don't use the space. I think the last thing that I wanted to highlight, and again, we're talking about the revisions, is, let's see,
I think it would be the periodic review, right? You introduced that concept.
yeah.
That,
Well, that was in the original. Yeah, I think that's it.
So I have just kind of a general question, because I appreciate all the diligence and that's gone into this. I think you're really trying to figure out how to fit sort of a square peg in some other weird shaped hole. But one of the questions I kind of have is why make it so specific? Why not just pick some kind of an adaptive reuse overlay zone instead that allows us to anywhere in town, instead of for such a specific use? Why not have more generic requirements where it could be a warehouse supermarket, and so under the warehouse supermarket concept, the sales floor has to follow the retail requirements and health inspections and everything that come with that use. So you can kind of say in the special permit process for an adaptive reuse overlay, you can specify whatever kind of use, but still save some of the other sort of flexibility that's in here, because I think the reserved area concept is really great. We have really sort of a strange mix of older retail, and commercial space in Wethersfield, and so having this kind of idea for the reserved area is very useful. And so why make it so specific, I guess, instead of going with something a little more generic?
I can only give my thought process. There is absolutely no reason why you couldn't broaden it. And you would say, well, why didn't I draft it broadly? I would say because it's generally my bias to make a text amendment as narrow as possible. And if the commission wants to make it broader, I'm all in favor of that. But we don't need it to be broader for our purposes. And again, a lot of commissions want it as narrow as possible so that it doesn't have other consequences. But I think that's a great idea. And as a matter of fact, I gave some thought to just, not talking about supermarket, just talk about, but like you just said, other uses that for whatever reason have lesser parking needs than that kind of use normally would have.
Right, I think you can still say in any kind of an adaptive reuse scenario that you might carve out an old building that wasn't designed for that to have multiple uses that have weird mix of parking requirements, and we can have that flexibility in the special permit process we kind of do already.
Right.
And for a lot of uses, in this case, it's a highly specialized combination of uses. So, but I don't think this will be the last time that general concept comes up. So I just wonder what's the benefit of making it so specific?
My thoughts run parallel to my brother Commissioner in the way the definitions are running and being interpreted. Supposing, I was an applicant whose business was not in groceries, for example, in foodstuffs, but say electronics. But I wanted the same kind of flexibility that you're proposing for your client for the operation of my business. Based upon what we see here, I couldn't do so without coming forth with a completely new amendment to the zoning regulations, because there's not the flexibility for utilizing the same kind of regulatory strategy for other kinds of mixed retail commercial enterprises.
I completely agree, and I gave some thought originally to calling it retail warehouse or warehouse retail, and that's all you'd really have to do, is just take that word supermarket, substitute retail, and I think it would work great.
And even just if making it an overlay zone means we also don't lose any underlying,
Well, if you take out the supermarket, you have to change the definition, because your
It
definition
would be
gets
Yeah,
to a lot of that, yeah.
so wherever you see supermarket, yeah, you change that to retail.
Dave, what was your
Can we
comment?
use the word retail warehouse?
so like a Costco is, I've randomly
Because
looked up the South Windsor
If
Costco.
that building's typed
Sorry.
for food only, if they ever want to change it, they got to go through the process again.
Right.
But the process, that would seem to be more simplified if, utilizing the same regulation, but for a special permit for the particular kind of business, not that the particular kind of business is limited by the regulation itself, by the language of the regulation of having only one kind of business enterprise in this particular kind of zone. Because, if we're opening up the zone for, more innovative ways of utilizing properties whose use have now become archaic, then we need to make it, I think, one with greater simplicity for future applicants to come before the commission to apply for a special permit for their mix of different kinds of business. If in the way that they carry on their kind of business, even though their trade is maybe in one category of goods, electronics versus groceries, for example,
Good
or
point.
foodstuffs.
Are there any other questions for the applicant?
I just want to make 2 points, sorry, Trace, before I forget. Two things to keep in mind. So it's a very good point, Commissioner, about the adaptive reuse, and I think it's very relevant, especially because we have 2 applications tonight, and both of them are for the adaptive reuse of existing sites and structures. And again, being relatively new, there is an existing section, and for those commissioners who have their zoning regulations, section 5.6, exceptions for business redevelopment, does define and provide the commission discretion on modifying the zoning regulations when they find certain objectives are met. And one of them does allow the commission to modify one or more of the requirements of the zoning regulations when the development is going to be, consistent with, and I can read them for the record in case it's relevant, but there's 5 requirements that allows the commission to, or 5 criteria that the commission should consider when they're going to modify the regulations. The one is that the modification will result in substantial function or aesthetic improvements in the overall character of the property, the neighborhood, and the community, including the building design, site design, building landscaping, perimeter landscaping, parking area landscaping, signage, and similar attributes. Number 2, provide for the most appropriate use of the land and the neighborhood. Number 3, provide for the most orderly development of the land in the neighborhood. Number 4, protect the public health and safety and preserve property values. And number 5, otherwise further the purpose of this section and these regulations. In my review of these, that does give the commission discretion to modify one or more of the requirements when those objectives are met by modifying them. So I think that you do have, you have acknowledged that there are going to be situations where you need to modify your regulations. And then number 2, I think in terms of the definition, if we can remember where we started in the pre-application, which is completely separate and we're not supposed to really consider that, it is relevant, that I think most important of what's being presented is the use. For several years now, this property owner has been struggling with the use that we have a retail use that's permitted, but we've had an inventory or storage use that has greatly exceeded that in terms of square footage of one particular site, which again, we're not considering one particular site here tonight, but so I do think it's important no matter what that they address a use that we currently don't have defined that does recognize you have a retail use and a large storage component. And I think if we achieve that, or if the applicant does achieve that, that's really the intent.
David, if I could ask a question from your this immediate presentation, are you saying that applying the, if we adopt this new 514 with, let's see, this new proposed 514 regulation in concert with the 5.6 regulation that you just read us, that the two regulations combined provide the commission with the necessary or needed flexibility to kind of permit upon a special permit application, basically any kind of a business mix that would conform to the standards of 5.6?
I think they're independent. I don't think they know, they both serve different functions. This proposal, 5.14, is necessary by itself to achieve what the applicant would like to do with one property that, again, I'm trying to, we don't want to address. You already have that discretion. So if this use gets, you would need both. The applicant needs both, but the commission could already, in my opinion, modify one or more of the zoning regulations, including parking. You've already given yourself discretion over parking. So if parking was the only reason that an applicant couldn't get a site plan approved for the adaptive reuse of a building or the renovation or rehabilitation, you could modify that already. You already have the ability to modify the parking.
So the issue here is that
I don't know that they need to include the new parking ratio, but I think they're doing it out of good measure, so it's very explicitly listed that this is the parking ratio for this use. So I think that's important, because if I were the applicant, I would say, well, I don't know that the commission is going to use this discretion, and therefore I want to propose the parking regulation and the parking ratio I need, which is what the applicant's doing. What I'm suggesting is that the commission could actually waive the parking requirement or modify the parking requirement. But they cannot, the applicant still needs the use. They need this proposed use, because for a few years they have not been able to move forward because of the use.
I understand that.
But it sounds like I don't want.
That's the question. The use issue is that they have too much inventory space versus sales space.
That has been the opinion of prior
That's-
planners.
That's
and
the
yes,
real crux of the issue
Correct.
here.
Yes.
That's what makes this unique.
Correct.
Okay, sorry.
Not both. I think they're independent, Tom, Commissioner. I just want to make sure that and I also think based on the discussion that there's probably some modifications to this.
Okay, but if I were, say, in the business of providing an electronics business in which I'm going to have the way the sales happen very similar to the way this proposed business pursuant to the new 514 or the proposed 514 is structured, I would need to utilize it I would need to basically use 5.6 in conjunction with 514 in order to get the flexibility necessary to basically do the same kind of thing for this or other properties, even though my business is not in handling foodstuffs. I may have not been totally clear with my question, but
Yes, this use, regardless as to what you were using in the warehouse, whether it was electronic, well, in this case, it is food, he's going to, as proposed, the use would be permitted by special permit. Every other special permit requirement would still exist, including this new parking ratio. So the applicant's not requesting any discretion. What I'm saying is you already have discretion. The applicant's not asking for any discretion and is not suggesting they need any discretion. In fact, they will not need any discretion, or so they think, by proposing what they've applied. They're going to apply for a use, and they're going to apply for a parking ratio associated with that use, separate from the adaptive reuse. The only reason I introduced the idea of the adaptive reuse is because it is in your regulations, and clearly it's needed every once in a while. Clearly the town needs it. You have an industrial corridor along a railroad that predates existing zoning, and therefore, which you've already done, the commission's already given itself some discretion on how they can modify regulations to reuse or renovate an existing building. Completely separate. I only mention that because Commissioner Brecklin mentioned that an overlay zone could achieve that as well, and I'm suggesting you already have that.
You have it. There's some questions on this side I'd like to take. Tracy?
Yeah, no, so my question was exactly getting at what Dave was just talking about, like, why we're actually creating a new use category if we already had the ability to do so. And I'm also a little, it seems like really the only reason that we've drafted this is so that they can have fewer spaces per 1,000 square feet than a normal retail space.
It is the parking, but it is the use. So the opinion for a few years consistently has been that the accessory use of warehousing or storage has been so large compared to the retail use that it's no longer accessory, which is significant. So what this does, I would agree that this use does need to be added.
But it couldn't just be considered a joint use under like I'm looking at the parking and loading regulations, and it specifically says, look at joint use of parking facilities. So I guess I don't understand why it wasn't already being considered a joint use, retail and warehouse, and it doesn't matter what the size ratio is.
Yes, there's a position there. But so before we got here, and again, I'm trying to not be site specific.
Okay. I didn't realize, I'm unclear as to why it has to have more. Our regulations require that they have to have a certain amount of retail versus a certain amount of warehouse somewhere?
It's the definition of accessory use. I believe it's
Right.
incidental and subordinate. And so,
Right. But would this actually be I didn't think it was, I think of it as a joint use as opposed to an accessory use.
we don't allow warehousing in this zone. That was another part of the problem.
All right,
Yeah.
gotcha.
And that was consistently sort of reviewed by multiple different planners and town attorneys and applicants. Like It's the use, and so the commission has given it, in the discretion, the commission has given itself its discretion, it has given itself discretion to determine what is similar uses. So that is in your regulations, and you can determine that. And the discretion under section 5.6 for the rehabilitation allows you to modify what I would call table and bulk requirements: height, setbacks, lighting, parking, landscaping. But the use has consistently been determined that because warehousing is not allowed in this zone and storage is not allowed in this zone, that because the storage and the warehousing element was so large, that the applicant needed to propose a regulation where it was one use, which is why there's a definition that has both. Thank you.
I
That's
didn't
probably
understand
good
that
for
part.
everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
It's good for me to even talk through it.
All right, thank you.
Yes, I have another question relating to the warehousing and definition of warehousing, because in the material submitted by the applicant, he has made use of an article that really related to the kind of the part of the use for this business is, as I think the term used was, a distribution center, in which you have materials that are stored only very temporarily, but are moved out very rapidly. And I think the idea of a warehouse is where things are more or less stored semi-permanently, rather than moving in and out all the time. Because the purpose for his distribution center is items are placed there very temporarily as bulk storage, as bulk storage that are moved in and out very rapidly, as opposed to a storage of materials that are essentially where the plan for them is that they're going to stay there for an extended period of time before they're moved to someplace else. Now, does that kind of consideration affect the definition of a warehouse versus a retail business?
There was some communication we received prior to tonight's public hearing. Is that what's informing the question? There was a document that was shared about the difference between a distribution center and a warehouse. I am not an expert in these, and I wouldn't want to suggest that I could even answer that. But my understanding is that this is not a distribution center. Is that?
Yeah,
I don't want to speak for the applicant. My understanding is it's not a food distribution
My intent
center.
was to make it as clear as possible, even though we use the word warehouse, just like BJ's Warehouse uses the word warehouse. It's not a real warehouse. It's not a warehouse per se. It's not a distribution center. And if I may, I think the basic problem was that in the beginning, when my client was setting up his business, town came in and they saw all these goods on pallets, and they said, oh, this is a warehouse. Well, it really is not a warehouse, because it's not, the goods are not there to be distributed to other resellers or retailers. They're there in order to be sold on the premises, or to be delivered directly, not to retailers, not to resellers, but to end users. And I think the problem that Mr. Elder is alluding to is, even though I don't consider the storage in this use as really storage, as a storage use or a warehouse use, any more than I would say the stock room at a Stop and Shop is storage or warehouse. It's part and parcel of a retail use, but where you have so much storage, I think it does make sense to just make it real clear that this is still a retail use, a special kind. And I think that's the genesis of, why we're here for a text amendment, even though, as Mr. Elder points out, there's other sections in the regulations that are kind of vague, but that you could hang your hat on to approve this use without a text amendment. But I think it's better for everyone to have it, so there's no question, to have it spelled out clearly what's a retail use, what's a permitted use, and what isn't, and, what sort of the parameters for parking ratios are.
I think that's clear. It's cleared it up for me anyways. Anyone have any other questions? Dave?
Well, what it is with a food warehouse, you're walking on a different line than if you were an electronics warehouse, because the FDA dealing with food or human consumption looks at a different set of rules. And from what I know, I've done a couple warehouses for specialties. The minute you start becoming a distribution center, you're in a different world than a Costco and a Stop and Shop. And it's a totally different world for inspections. And when you wrote this, you wrote it correctly that you were no longer in the wholesale business.
Right.
And you said you were delivering the groceries opposed to people, more or less picking it up, and you were not a supplier of the food for other retailers to sell.
That's exactly, we want to make that as clear as possible. It's not a distribution center if it's not a real warehouse. I mean, warehouse in this context is really a marketing term. It describes a no-frills kind of retail environment where stuff is stored on pallets and it kind of looks like a warehouse. And the idea is that people understand that they're getting a good price because of the no-frills and because it looks like a warehouse, but it's not really a warehouse.
I'd like to go back to what Dave brought up before on the language. Are you going to take a crack at rewording that?
Sure, I certainly can. I mean,
Like that to be, I want that removed, the adaptive reuse, because that,
Which one?
you're taking on a food warehouse. And from that's where it gets fuzzy. You're now a food warehouse with a retail addition, but now because it's a merger of the two, you drop the requirements of a food warehouse distribution.
Looks like you took it out.
I'm not an expert, but I just know from doing warehouses that when you start dealing with human consumption or animal consumption, the FDA looks at it entirely different than if you're a warehouse for electronics or something like that.
right.
Dave Drake, I wanted to address your point
in that
there.
paragraph, I think we just have to say you don't have to take into account the reserves.
Yeah, that's,
I mean,
that's what I meant. I just meant to
don't
say,
say that to me that way.
in
Just-
assessing your parking needs, you could take into account that we're not using the whole building. That's all I meant, which is the same thing you're saying, Commissioner. And we could, it's an easy fix.
Okay. Dave, anything else?
No, not unless,
Anyone else? More questions, concerns? Anyone in the audience who wishes to speak? There was one correspondence that we received. I'd just like to note that for the record. Was it? We received a communication from Tom Carson, and I'll just paraphrase that basically he's stating here that he has concerns with the fact that it's taken so long for this project to come to fruition, and that the applicant has had some issues and problems along the way, wondering why it took so long, and he's basically concerned, how is this going to move along? Given where we are and how long it's taken to come here, how is it going to move along? Do you have I guess the way I read this, do you have the firepower to execute and move forward with this, should this come to pass? Is basically what he's asking.
I can tell you that the property owner has engaged Freeman Companies, which is a fairly well-known land planning firm in the area. And they are actively working on plans to come before you as soon as we can get the plans ready. I think that the landscape architect was here at the pre-application meeting, and he gave an estimate of 3 months, I believe. That was from then, so that would mean it's probably a month from now, but my guess is it might be a little longer, the way things go. but we're actively working on it, and it'll be soon, and nobody wants it to be sooner than Mr. Zhang, I can assure you of that.
I would just like to focus on Mr. Carson's comments with the fact that although we are looking at text amendment that's site-specific, it's not site-specific for tonight's discussion anyway, but Mr. Carson does have some very good points, just for the record.
Before we wind up closing the hearing, which we're not ready yet, I think, I just have a question for our town planner. Given the comments and recommendations that you made in your memo, and the revision of May 19th, 2025 that we've just received, does the May 19 submission incorporate or address the concerns and recommendations that you made in your memorandum?
No, it doesn't, but I think the items that we just discussed tonight do. So, we made revisions, and I think we all agree we might be able to make those right now, but no, it does not. I think we've since changed the revisions from the submission today. If I may I just take some time? So I think we've all agreed on page 1 of the proposal that we do think there's a need to add a new use that's permitted, a warehouse supermarket. I heard that we, Commission, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that we think the adaptive reuse should be eliminated. We don't need a new accessory use of storage of inventory. We do need to do the new definition of a warehouse supermarket, so that would remain. We do need the definition of inventory storage because it's referred to in the purpose in the definition. We would eliminate the reserved area because there is no need for the reserved area. And then we would keep the purpose and the applicability. We probably need to wordsmith that to make it a little bit more concise in my opinion, but I think the intent is there. We want to explain what this is and how it's applied. And then on page 3, we would keep everything except where we start talking about the reserved area, which begins right about here. Sorry. All this would go away, and it's going to be a white screen, so it's pretending as though it's gone. This goes away. So we talk about this establishes the parking ratio, which would have to go into our parking table, and then it picks up saying the commission as a special permit would be allowed to periodically review the parking conditions. I think we all agreed that we would want that, and then this
Before you go on, and
Yeah.
it changed from 2 to 1 3/4. Are you okay with that? I mean, the initial one said 2 parking spaces per 1,000.
Well, the prior one didn't have any recognition of the storage inventory space, and I think that there should be. In fact, I'd rather see, even if 90% of a facility is storage or inventory, I think there should be a parking ratio attached to it.
Yeah, okay, so that's the 0.5, right?
Yes, right.
And the 1.75 is acceptable to you now, right?
I think that's one of the biggest questions here is what we're
Right, exactly.
So
That's something we need to consider.
if I may, in my mind, when I originally drafted the first version that had the 2 spaces per 1,000, in my mind, the parking needs associated with the storage part were already baked into that too. So that's why I thought it was appropriate, if we're going to separately recognize the parking needs associated with the storage, I thought it made sense to slightly reduce the parking needs associated with the floors, with the sales floor area, because that would no longer include the storage. If you're going to separate them, I thought the sales floor ratio should be a little lower. And candidly, if you kept that at 2, that would that would limit the amount of sales floor area my client could have to probably something like 35,000 square feet, which isn't very much.
Understand.
And so just moving forward, so we discussed there's no need to present a reserved area, and I think after the discussion, at least I've sort of changed my thought. I don't think that we should address the reserved area because
Take that out, right?
it would be eliminated, right? So that would go away as well. And so what we're left with, again, the commission is allowed to, there is a proposal in front of the commission. We're holding a public hearing. The commission is allowed to adopt the text amendment or modify it or deny it or adopt it as they see fit and revise it. So what's being considered is permitted. So we would end up with a new permitted use by special permit. It would include a new definition that acknowledges the retail use of sort of a bulk nature, including a large inventory storage component defined. We would not need a reserved area. Sorry, I missed that. That would also go away. We would have a purpose applicability, parking ratio established, which would be in a different format. It would be in our parking table. And otherwise they would have to comply with all other special permit and site plan requirements.
Okay, that simplifies things. That's good.
Now, does that interfere with, by completely eliminating the adaptive reuse provision of the regulations, does that mean that other properties would be stuck with this and could not, for example, have adaptive reuse of properties that would mix different kinds of uses, say between, small scale retail, restaurant, residential, all at the same kind of property, which is one of the degrees of flexibility that I think we want our regulations to include.
No, it would not at all. Not in the least, because that adaptive reuse is already in the zoning regulations, and this wouldn't in any way impact what you can already do with that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Anything else?
Not for me.
All right. Last call. Anyone wish to speak? Hey, what's the, yeah. Dave?
Can I, just a comment. When you guys came in last time, to me, this is a great use for the building. Everything of what you did is fine. But I did notice today, I looked at that complaint, and I just wonder if you have any comments where that is, because since that last time we came in here, and I'm involved in a lot of boards in town, and I'll be honest with you, every time this has come up, nobody seems to be happy. I said, this is a great, nobody seems to be happy. All the other boards have said, why are you doing this, why are you doing this? Is things settled down, or where are we going? I'm just saying, there just seems to be a lot of things that over the years I've been doing this, I've never seen so much. And again, didn't hear about it when you guys came in the first time, but that was a month and a half ago, and I've heard, and forget all my meetings, the issues. I just hope things settle down, because it didn't have to be like that. I don't know why it is.
That's
the comment.
I think that's been my goal since I got involved in the fall, was to get things settled down, and I think they're settling down. And this is part of that process.
I've just never seen this issue to come up like this before all the time, and I've been doing this stuff for years.
Right.
Again, I like what you have here, what you want to put here, but I just never heard so many problems, and this is where other places I walk around in this building, so I just
Right.
have a comment. I hope we get it straightened out.
All right. Are we comfortable enough to close it, or do you want to leave it open and see the actual cleaned up text? I mean, we kind of went through it quickly.
Why not leave it open
Yeah, I would like to see the
and
clean
get
text.
the final?
I personally would like to see the cleaned up text. It's
Gonna stop him though, right?
I
You
would
keep
too.
going with-
Yeah, me
with his
too.
life, right?
Sorry.
Yeah, I would like to see basically, the final
Yeah, the
language.
cleaned up text.
That's
So
right.
that we know exactly what we're voting on.
Yeah, I also think we need to see if there are any public comments or if that, before we close the hearing.
Tonight, there weren't any, but perhaps there'll be next time. All right, is there a motion to continue this meeting?
Oh, so moved?
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Thank you
we'll
very much.
continue this till next
In a
time.
couple weeks.
Very good.
Are you comfortable doing it
Yeah,
yourself?
that's cool.
Okay.
Okay, next item is public hearing 220925Z,
Want to start with the presentation,
Commercial Development
or do you want to?
Services Group LLC, seeking a special permit in accordance with Section 5.2 of permitted principal uses, 5.3 accessory use and structures, 5.8 alcoholic beverages for a multi-tenant building with office, restaurant, place of assembly, outdoor dining, and other similar uses at 207 Church Street. Is the applicant ready to present?
I am. Say. All right, perfect. Thank you. Good evening. For the record, my name's Megan Hope. I'm an attorney with Alter, Pearson & Hope in Glastonbury, here tonight representing the applicant for the public hearing. Just a couple of items I wanted to note for the record. The first is that we did post the public hearing sign in accordance with the regulations, and I do have an affidavit, which I'll give to. And the client also did send the required mailings to the abutters as well, and those proof of mailings were provided to Lynn in the planning office. As the call of the public hearing indicated, this is for a special permit application associated with 2 lots which are located on the south side of Church Street. It's 207 Church Street, and also a contiguous lot. It is located in the town center zone, and we are proposing to redevelop the site for a mix of uses. This is an aerial view of the surrounding area. I've highlighted the site in the dashed yellow line. As you can see from the map, we're on the south side of Church Street, so north is to the left side of your screen. The Silas Deane Highway is a little bit further to the west side of the site, and the railroad tracks run across the easterly side of our property line. The site contains an existing commercial building that was built in the 1800s. It's been used for a variety of different uses over the years. It's been vacant for the past several years. We're looking to redevelop it as part of the special permit application. This is some aerial views of the site. It's a view from Church Street looking south. Again, you can see the railroad tracks to the east. Church Street is in the foreground on the left side of the screen. The total building is about 20,000 square feet. It is 1 story in this portion of the building, and then we have 2 and then 3 stories as well in this portion of the building. This is a view looking towards the east. You can see the railroad tracks there. This is a view looking north. You can see Church Street here. And then this is a view looking west. It's a little bit hard to tell, but Silas Deane Highway is up here towards this part of the screen. We will be maintaining this entire building, and Aaron Butler, our architect, will be going through the detailed architectural changes that we are proposing to the plan. We did go before the design review committee and received positive recommendation from them. And we are headed towards the Wetlands Commission tomorrow night. So we will hopefully be wrapped up with that by the time we come back to you. Because we are still waiting for a report from the Wetlands Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission cannot close the public hearing tonight. So to the extent you have questions or need additional information, we do have some time to answer any questions you have before we come back in June, where I think we will likely be ready for a vote. Okay, so just to give you a little context on the zoning, our site, which is highlighted in green on this screen, is located in the town center zone. We are just outside of the limits of the historic district, which is located to the east. Everything to the east on this screen or to the top of the screen is in a residential zone. It's a completely residential area. And then everything to the west is located in the town center zone. We do have some office uses, which is the Farm Bureau building that's over here at 78 Beaverbrook, and then we have some additional office type uses, business uses over to the north. So essentially commercial on the west side of the railroad tracks and residential on the east side. We had come before this commission for a pre-application review in March. We are proposing 3 different types of uses. The largest use will be an office use, be about 13,000 square feet of the building. We are proposing restaurants with outdoor dining. Those will have sort of 2 components, a breakfast, lunch, eating option, and then also a dinner type restaurant. And then we will have a place of assembly, which is about 6,000 square feet. We are requesting an accessory alcohol use for those restaurants use and the place of assembly, so we've included that as it's an additional special permit that we need. But the restaurant would have a full bar, and the place of assembly would have canned beer and wine. Each of those would require separate liquor permits from the state. Okay, as we had reviewed at the pre-application meeting, but I'll just reiterate here, the uses we're proposing are allowed by special permit in the town center zone. I've shown that screen here, which shows that a office use less than 20,000 square feet allowed by special permit, restaurant with outdoor dining also allowed after the issuance of a special permit, and same with a place of assembly, which we are considering that use on the west side of the building as allowed after a special permit. So we've indicated here that all of our proposed uses are allowed in the zone. And then, as I mentioned, our accessory use of the sales of alcoholic beverages or dispensing is also a special permit use in the zone. So we've included that in our application materials. Okay, this is our current site plan. We have revised it slightly since we were before you in March, and I'll just go through those changes quickly before I hand it off to the engineer. But there are 2 existing curb cuts along Church Street. Those will remain. We are going to have a essentially one-way circulation pattern off of Church Street. So you would enter at this easterly entrance, which is at the top of your screen, and then I lost my mouse, there it is. And then you would drive along the east side of the property into the parking area, and then you would exit back out on the west side of the building to Church Street. This plan has 125 parking spaces located on our site. They're mostly located in the southerly portion of the lot here, but we do have some spaces along the drive aisle, some parallel spaces here. And there already are existing parking spaces in front of the building, 5 spaces that we will be maintaining in the developed condition. This yellow square here is the limits of the existing building. Again, we're not changing any of that footprint. A couple changes to note since the last meeting, at the pre-application meeting, we've rearranged some of the parking in this area here. That was a request we had received from the fire marshal's office. We had some parallel spacing here, but they'd asked us to remove that, which we did. We did rearrange the handicap parking spaces, but they're still generally in this area of the site, proximate to the ADA entrance. We do indicate an area here for the food truck. That was one of the requests we had received last time, was to have a designated area out of any of the driveway areas. So we do have that tucked away nicely here. And we did make this deck area a little bit smaller, and I have a rendering later in the PowerPoint so you get a sense of what that is, but that was another request we had received from the commission. So we think that our updated site plan has addressed a lot of the comments we received at the pre-application review. Again, we've reviewed this with the Design Review Commission, and they were in support of our proposal. The other items that were, I think, important to the commission at the last meeting was that you wanted some additional information on parking. That was critical, and I have some information on that in the presentation. And you also were looking for a sound study as well, which I have later in the presentation. But I think before we get to that, I'm going to hand it off to our engineer, Seamus. He can walk you through a little bit more of the details with the plan, how we're going to deal with, yes, go ahead.
Just before you move on, in the packet, there's a reference made, I think, by the Architectural Design Review Committee about lighting. Mm-hmm. And I think, Dave, you also made the same comment, right? I think from staff. Are you looking at lighting? Will you provide?
We do have a lighting plan. I have it in the PowerPoint. It was, I think, finished on Friday, but we couldn't get it to Lynn before the packets went out.
Okay.
So we do have lighting plans. Did we already give those, John, to Lynn? Yeah, so Lynn has.
sent those out like today, I think.
I didn't see them.
Okay, so we do have those. So yes, we do have a lighting plan. It's in the PowerPoint, although reading a lighting plan in a PowerPoint is very hard. But anyways, we have hard copies upstairs, and so I think we can get those to you, or if we need any more. But yes, we have. We did have the lighting, it just wasn't in time for the packet.
All right, thank you.
All right, I'll pass it off to our engineer, Seamus.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Seamus Moran, a professional engineer in Connecticut and principal at H&H Engineering Associates in Mystic. Meg did a really nice job of giving you an overlay of what we're thinking of the property. As I'm sure you're all familiar with the property right now, it's a sea of asphalt behind the building. We're looking to maintain the access drives, the eastern access entrance, the western exit, and behind the building, which is right now is just a sea of asphalt. We're just essentially formalizing that parking area. Any asphalt that's unnecessary, that doesn't fit within the access aisle or is not a parking space, we're looking to remove. So by removing that excess asphalt, we're actually eliminating about 0.3 acres of impervious coverage right now. And actually, I think it's a little bit more than that. When I was out doing soil testing, I found there was some asphalt that went into the brush line that doesn't look like it's defined as asphalt, but it goes probably almost right to the top of the slope along Beaver Brook to the west. So we're eliminating about 0.3 acres, 12,700 square feet. That is, I guess, one of the main improvements for the site for stormwater management. So one of the, for a site redevelopment such as this, the Stormwater Quality Manual looks at it as a retrofit. If you are looking at a fully developed site and you're trying to implement some stormwater management improvements, there's a couple of retrofit options rather than starting from scratch, which we obviously do not have. Some of the best retrofit options are to disconnect impervious areas, which we're doing by installing or removing some asphalt where the landscape islands will be. That'll allow some of the runoff to get into those landscape islands and infiltrate there, essentially disconnecting some of that impervious surface. Impervious surface reduction, which I mentioned.
I just want to make a point, and I apologize if I missed it, but these are some of the low-impact development techniques that you're incorporating, which are one of the elements that our regulations allow for design
Yes.
practices.
Yes, for a best site practice or
Yeah, that's I'm
regulation,
forgetting
I
it,
can't think
but
of
excellence in design.
Yes, that's the
Excellent,
one.
excellence in design, but these are the low-impact development techniques you're employing.
That's right.
I just want to make a point of saying that. Okay.
Thank you. So we're using the 2024 manual to add some best management practices to the site. So like I said, the disconnecting impervious, reducing impervious, and what you can see here, hopefully if you can see the cursor, along this down gradient edge of the parking area, there's an infiltration trench that we're proposing. That infiltration trench will infiltrate up to the 1-inch storm event, which is generally where all the constituents are found. Any pollution in the stormwater that's found from the runoff from the pavement comes out, about 90% of it comes out in that first 1-inch rainstorm event. So that is, I don't know, do we have another plan? Okay. Well, the planting plan I'll get to in a moment. Let me go back to the site plan. As Meg mentioned, we have 125 parking spaces on site. If you were to look at the uses individually, the requirement would be 54 spaces for the office use, 26 spaces for the restaurant, and 152 spaces for the entertainment space. The commission, by special permit, is allowed to consider a shared parking calculation. So early on at our first meeting, our pre-app meeting, I did my best traffic engineer impersonation, and I looked at a regulation in a different town for a shared parking calculation. So obviously the office use and the entertainment space aren't being used at the same time. I used a similar regulation in a different town just to kind of get a warm and fuzzy to find out that we were close on the numbers. So that's how we move forward before. There's a shared parking calculation on the plans that we submitted to you. Since then, however, we had a traffic engineer prepare a parking study for us. So what I determined for parking was much more than what the traffic engineer determined for the maximum parking. So what the traffic engineer determined for the maximum parking demand for the site is 128 parking spaces during the weekday, and that's between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m., and 129 spaces on the weekend, and that's from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. And that's based on the traffic, the ITE handbook, essentially, the traffic engineer's handbook. And that just takes multiple sites of similar uses across the country and kind of puts a scatter plot together to find out how many parking spaces are needed for each of the uses, and gets you an average number, and that's how he determined those parking demands.
Question for you, if you take the raw numbers of our regulations that you quoted, how much is that in total?
That was 232 spaces if you don't consider.
I understand, just, this is raw number,
Correct.
232?
232, correct. So the same traffic engineer who did the parking study also did a traffic impact study. Essentially what he came down to is that it's not going to impact the level of service. It's A's and B's leaving the site. A total of 152 trips are being generated. 127 are entering, and 24, I believe, is what he said, were leaving. And that's what he came up with at the absolute peak for the weekday. I think with that, I'm not sure if Meg wants to go into the planting plan. We do have a planting plan prepared by our landscape architect that you see before you here. Essentially, he just tried to decorate what is undecorated right now. I wanted to put some plantings in there just to liven it up and put some greenery, improve some of the landscape islands with some vegetation and some trees. Here is the lighting plan that Meg mentioned that we submitted, I believe, yesterday. That didn't make it into your packets, but it's on the slideshow slide that you see before you here.
Back one slide, go back there.
Sure.
What is that on the bottom left? Tower, or is that a fence, or what is it, a walk, or?
Bottom left.
Says new.
Down, right, up, left, up, right there.
These? Oh, yeah, that's drainage pipe. It's probably too bold. That's just a drainage pipe. It's underground.
Oh, drainage.
You can't see that, but it's there, underground.
Well, back to the parking question, are you going to walk through how much parking you have in total, including the agreement you have with your neighbor?
Yes.
I'd just like to understand it.
I have some more
Because
slides.
we have 232 by our regulations.
Yes.
You have 128 by expert opinion
Right.
on how these things work, and then
Right.
you have extra park. Can you put it all together for us, please?
Yes, no problem. Okay, so I'm gonna skip through this, okay. So we already talked about what your regulations require, and just to reiterate, and this is on Seamus's plan, but there's, office is based on square footage, the restaurant is based on table seats plus employees in the largest shift, and then your place of assembly is either based on permitted occupancy or by a square footage, whichever is more. In our case, the permitted occupancy was more, based on occupancy, which is building code, fire code calculations. It can be up to 607, which is like everybody standing in there, essentially. So we did use, when we did that, that's how we get to the 232. Okay, so the couple things I did want to reiterate with your parking regulation is you do require that all the parking is either on the same lot, or the commission is allowed to approve parking on another lot in unique circumstances within 250 feet of the site. So that is obviously what we're focusing on here. We have a big historic building that we don't want to tear down just to build more parking, obviously. And we do have sites in the vicinity that allow us to have parking.
This is the Kellstrom building across the street.
Correct.
And you have an agreement for 3 years, right?
Correct. Yep. And so your regulations do say that we are allowed to, you are allowed to consider shared parking based on the uses if they're peaking essentially at different hours of the day. And your regulations say that in no case shall the total parking requirement be reduced below the estimated peak hour parking need. So that's why it is important that we went to the traffic engineer and found out what that peak number is, because we are asking for you to accept the shared parking arrangement that we have. And under your regulations, under no circumstances can you go below the peak, which is what our expert says is 129. I think because this is a special permit, you could potentially ask for more parking than the 129 if you felt like that was something you needed to comply with the special permit criteria. But we can't go for sure below 129. That's what our expert is saying. So we, since the pre-application meeting, have been looking to find adjacent parking that we can use. We were in talks with the Farm Bureau, which is at 78 Beaver, and we still are having discussions with them, but we weren't able to come to an agreement with them for parking. It was just, the deal wasn't economically feasible. We did come to an agreement with 214 Church Street, that's the Kellstrom building right across the street. It has parking, some parking located in front and the side, and then a bunch of parking located in the back. I did submit that parking agreement to the commission because I did want to be transparent with what the terms are. It is a 3-year parking deal. There are hours that we can use it, which are the hours that they're not using it, essentially in the evening hours. So it does seem beneficial to us. And I think it's also important to note that your parking regulations do say the intent is for all sites to provide the least amount of parking. We don't want to pave everything if we don't need to. So we
I was
did.
just curious
Yeah, go ahead.
on the question. It's great that you have an agreement in place. I think that helps quite a bit. What happens after 3 years? Have you given some thought to that?
So I have given thought to that, and I think it's obviously a concern for us, and I think it's really the same concern for you. We want to make sure we have enough parking. And so I think one way that this could be addressed is I think it would be reasonable for the commission to put a condition on any approval that says that if this agreement goes away by either, the 3 years expires or there's some other termination, the applicant would have to find some other parking arrangement and would have to come back to the commission and say, okay, well, 214 isn't working, but we've come to an agreement with 78 Beaver or something like that. I think also potentially after the 3 years, we'd have some time of operating the business to basically confirm that what we thought would be the peak is the peak. So I think potentially we could come back, and again, this could be a condition that the commission puts on that says, come back 1 year after your CO or 2 years, whatever, and give us an update how it's working with parking and your use, because I think that's going to be one way that you can really confirm this is working.
All right, makes sense.
Yeah,
was
but
just
I think something like that, unless the commission really feels strongly like, no, we only want the parking on 214 Church and we wouldn't want it anywhere else, but I think there are enough adjacent properties that a lot of them could work just as well as any of the other ones.
Just refresh my memory. In the space that you have in the back, how much was that? And the sides and everything? How much do you have within your own site? How
On
much?
our site, we have 125.
125.
125.
So if we believe the peak numbers of your traffic engineer, you're almost
pretty
there.
close.
You're almost there.
We're almost there.
Independent of what you have on Church.
Independent of what we have. And Church Street is offering us 50 parking spaces, so that gets us to 175, which gets us over what the engineer thinks is the peak, but then still gives some room, obviously, for
Okay,
bigger events. Or
understand. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we did, as Seamus had mentioned, he did run the shared parking analysis, which he does off of the ITE manual, and he basically plugs in all the different uses. So you're seeing 3 columns going across this chart. You have the office use, the restaurant use, the entertainment use, and then he's looking at them at each hour of the day. And then he's finding that parking count that has the highest number. So we're getting 128 spaces on the weekday peak, and then 129 on the Saturday peak, and 129 on the Sunday. Okay. All right, the other item that you asked us to look at the pre-application review was a sound study. And we did engage Bennett Brooks of Brooks Acoustic Corporation, who did, I feel like, a very exhaustive sound study. I don't know if you had a chance to look through it, but I felt like it was very, very thorough. And just so you are aware, Bennett, when I was talking to him and getting ready for this presentation, he does do a lot of work in Wethersfield. He said he didn't think he had ever prepared something like this for the commission, but he does a lot of work On the building permit side of it, he mentioned how he worked on the Borden property. There's different sound proofing that needs to go on between apartments and commercial. So he has had some experience in town, but more so during the building permit side of things. But just to sort of walk you through this sound study, what Bennett did is he first did a baseline ambient sound study survey. So he went out there, and if you saw in the report, there were 2 microphones that he put. One was at 214 Church by the Kellstrom. One was sort of in the parking lot, but closer to the residential side of our site at 207 Church Street. And he measured those, basically the baseline sound. So just the cars on the Silas, Deane, and just sort of some of that ambient noise. And once he did that, he then looked at what's happening inside the building. So he created a model of what the venue is going to look like. He then added in, okay, this is what the building materials are. This is how much acoustic absorption there will be. He inputted sound pressure levels. Obviously, the audience makes noise. The sound system in a music venue would make noise. So he puts that information in. He includes reverberation rates in there. And then once he does that, he starts looking external again. He says, okay, where could sound leak out of this music venue? So we've got obviously RTUs, which are those like mechanical units on the roof. We have windows, and even though they're not open, you're going to get more sound coming out of like glass than you would a brick wall. And obviously the main entrance door, which is located here. It's obviously important to note in this that the music venue is on like that west side of the building, further away, obviously, from the residences. So then what he does is he measures the sound pressure. So he takes that ambient noise on the outside, he inputs what's happening inside the building and how much is leaking out, and then he projects it to see what is the noise going to be like at the property lines. And just to orient you, this is Church Street here. This is our site at 207 Church Street. And he's looking at these different residential areas, mostly east of the railroad tracks. But we do have an apartment building up here that he was measuring. And what you're seeing is that all these weighted decibel levels, the maximum goes up to 41. And if you remember back to the ambient noise, that's basically what the ambient noise was when he did the sound study.
I was curious, I mean, I didn't,
Yeah.
I look at all this, but I didn't quite catch it. The inside performance, what levels of decibels do you expect? I mean, if someone comes in with mega big equipment and guitars and so forth, electric guitars and all that, well, is that considered in this study?
Yes, he did. Let me look here. He did include that in the study. There was, I know when I was picking there's a lot of like crazy charts and stuff. I didn't want to make everybody fall asleep. So I was trying to pick some of the better pictures. Let me see here. Yeah, he did. Let's see here. Yeah, I think if you look at on page 11 of his calculations, he does an adjusted output scenario. So if you go to page 11, it's this bottom picture here. It almost looks like a heat map, kind of. I think that Peter is going to be helpful. But what that does is it has sort of like a heat map of where the sound is coming from. And the highest number I see in here is like 110, and that's close to one of the speakers.
That's pretty high. Okay.
So I think that kind of explains to you. So we're talking like in the hundreds, kind of. I'm sure it's all audience and probably depends on a lot of factors, but that's what he put in for inside.
Well, that's pretty good. That's almost painful.
Yeah. So I'm sure it depends on the artist.
But
Yeah.
don't you have 40 now?
Mm-hmm.
Don't you add that to 30?
So he does the weighted pressure. He did add that.
So you should be, so when you have everything going, you're gonna be at 70. Is that true? Is that how that works?
I don't think that's how it works, no.
Because I don't know why, but okay.
And I can definitely.
Curious, as we go farther, this
Is it additive?
What?
Is it additive?
I think it should be. I think it's additive, right?
No, because it's like your baseline. This is how loud it is now. Even if it's 100 there, it's only.
That's the case. If the baseline's at 40 and we're gonna add 30, so you
Yeah,
could
but
be at
sound is
70.
exponential, so it's not
You're
additive.
asking that question, not the same.
Yeah, yes, I can definitely ask him that question, and I told him, he was actually flying back to Connecticut tonight, so he couldn't
Okay, I
be
mean,
here.
something that,
But yeah, I can ask him that. I don't believe it's additive, but I can definitely ask him that question. And this sound pressure map, I felt like this was, at least for me, this made a lot of sense when I saw it. You can see the higher decibels are, and I think this maybe goes to your question, the higher decibels are in that yellow color, and they're facing away from the residences. So we were really checking, what's it gonna sound like by these houses, right? Which
No, I
are,
think what you do is a good job, I'm just kind of curious. They may not totally add together, maybe it's just...
yeah, I can ask him how that does, because I'm not even gonna pretend to understand how he did all his calculations.
Can I ask another question?
Go ahead.
Look at anything like the noise from the mobile food truck or from the restaurant, outdoor seating or anything as well?
I think he focused on the venue, but I can ask him if he could add in, or I'm sure in his experience, he would have an idea of like what the typical decibels would be from the food truck or from outdoor dining.
Look at that.
Yeah.
If I remember from the first presentation, the food truck, there's a plug-in, right? It's not going to need to run generators?
Correct.
Okay.
So it's definitely going to be a plug-in?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's it. You don't have to, yes.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Just, do you have a comparison of your highest, which is 41, relative to our regulations, which I
So,
think,
yep, it does meet within your regulations, which he
what's our
does.
regulation, 42?
No, hold on a
I thought it
second.
was 40.
Yeah, it's 40. Let me see
Well,
here.
United States, 40, you don't have
45, yep, 45 during,
like industrial regulation, I think you do 40.
yeah, he indicates based on the ordinance, it's 55 decibels from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then during the night times, it goes down to 45. So we're below that.
And notwithstanding all that, that measurement, that standard applies to the sound level at the edge of the property line.
Correct. Right. So we took it conservative. We didn't even take it to the house or presumptive, where people would probably be at that time of night. Yeah, we took it to the property line.
So, it's,
Correct.
you know, so there's going to be some sound attenuation by virtue of just the distance from the building to the
Definitely.
property line.
The sound has been an issue in parts of Old Wethersfield. So I think it's important that we're clear on this point.
Sure. So I can definitely ask Bennett to, that question about if it's additive or not.
See the complaint.
Could I also I remember reading in the report, and I don't want to get it wrong, but it might be worthwhile to mention, I know that when he was doing the testing, he heard a modified exhaust vehicle on Silas Deane, and I thought it was interesting that he captured that when they were doing the study, and it was much louder than what was going to be emitted
Yes.
on a regular basis from the...
Yes, I think, and I know I had looked, like 45 is typically like the sound of your dishwasher, like it's lower than I think you think it is. It's nothing like a police siren is 80 decibels, so we're way below that. Outside the venue, obviously inside it'll be louder, but you'll be paying to be there, so.
Paying for the pain.
Yeah, paying for the pain.
I have a somewhat related, somewhat unrelated question. I think you've already answered it, but just to make sure I understand, when the food trucks are there on site, their engines are turned off, or do they remain on?
Yeah, I'll have Aaron come answer that, sure.
It has relationship to both sound and as well as pollution.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Butler. I'm the architect with CDSG. So to answer your questions, yes, the food trucks or the food trailers will be turned off. We will have actual utility hookups that the trucks and
Urban noise is 75.
cooking staff will plug into,
So that's-
but there will be no
that's our
generators or
ordinance.
anything. So we're really trying to minimize the amount of noise outside the building. And regarding the outdoor patio, we're obviously limited by occupancy as well, so we're not planning on being able to have a ton of people out there.
Thank you. I thought I heard that being the short answer
Yes.
made by your counsel a little bit ago, but I just want to make sure that was clarified. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And so Mr. Brooks does conclude that the sound pressure levels that could be attributed to live music or entertainment would be between 27.5 decibels and 41.3 decibels, depending obviously on which property you were measuring from, that it's consistent with or lower than the prevailing background levels, which was at 40, and that it's not expected to be audible at most of the location, at the receivers that he had indicated, and that it complies with the Town of Wethersfield Noise Control Ordinance, which is 45 decibels for nighttime hours, which is really when he was focusing this study on. But I'm happy to ask him about adding in potential outdoor dining noise into his analysis, or anyways, I could still ask him.
In the question, is it additive?
Is it additive, or how
in
does
any
he,
way? Yeah.
yes, does he take, how does he really do that
How does he
calculation?
put 'em together?
Yes, I can ask him that, so we can get a response to you for that. All right, now I'm going to pass it back over to Erin, and she's going to walk you through the elevations that she's prepared.
Hello again. So we obviously were here for the pre-app. Not too much has changed on the exterior besides the outdoor patio that we have further defined. So this is the Church Street view. We're really working to maintain the beauty of the existing building. As I had mentioned previously, the historic place of significance designation through the National Park Service is in progress. And so we are limited by the Secretary of the Interior's historic requirements for maintaining a historic building such as ours. So we're really using the existing brick, all of the existing materials that we can in order to keep the building as is. You can see we do have a addition at the roof, just as we have to add an elevator for the 3-story office space. On the west side, so this you can see is where we have the venue space. You can see more of the gable roof addition up here. And then in the back of the lot closest to the south, near the parking lot, this is the patio that we are proposing. This is just a high-level rendering of what we're potentially thinking. This was also pulled together for our venue tenant so that she could see how much that was potentially going to impede in her space. And obviously, they're very happy, so that's great. But
Like the sign.
the sign that says sign, thank you. It's very meta. We're really just going with a raw and rugged industrial vibe to really tie into the industrial history of the building. As I mentioned, with the occupancy, we're really tight. It's only a 420 square foot patio, so it's a 10 by 40 roughly. And I think we're just excited to be able to offer the space for any sort of patrons. As you know, we have existing overhead doors out there that we're proposing that they'll be able to open during the daytime. So I think it will be integrated, important that we ask Bennett to look at that sound study as well.
Can I ask a question, ma'am?
Yes.
I see that you've got a roof overhang over there. How far out does that extend? Does that cover does the extension of the roof overhang cover fully the proposed patio that you're constructing, or is it less than that?
Yeah, so that actually dictated how deep the patio is. So the existing overhang is 10 feet. And so we're essentially just aligning that datum. So we're not pulling it too far out into that vestibule. So does that answer your question?
So it is out a little further?
They're both 10 feet.
Oh, they're both 10 feet, so it's precisely the same.
Yep.
How many tables will you put in that space, roughly?
Right now, I believe we're showing 3 or 4, but obviously because it's a restaurant, there's some sort of ebb and flow between the occupants on the inside and the outside of the space. We have sized the egress in order to accommodate for 12 to 20 outdoor patrons, but that is the back exit, so we're kind of oversizing the egress. The stair that's on this south side of the patio, as well as where the servers will be running the food from the outdoor food truck as well. So obviously we needed to take that into account for the sizing.
I have a question kind of for both the applicant and for our town planner. Assuming that the commission approves the request for the special permit for this, has there been any consideration for a facade improvement grant application on this property?
Not that I'm aware of. I know the applicant's been pursuing a historic designation, which I think takes precedent over their interest, as far as I know, in a facade loan.
I was thinking more of the non-historic, improvements to the non-historic part of the parcel or building, as opposed to the historic multi-story central building that's on the east side of the parcel.
Yeah, I would certainly defer to the applicant's architect. I know they're very, very engaged with that, but interestingly, I also know that they don't want them to change even the older or the newer portions of the building in any way to resemble the older portions. They want them to be distinguished by their age of construction, but I would defer to the applicants.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So unfortunately, from our understanding of our historic consultant, we are limited to exactly what the building is currently, including the additions. So what we're looking at right now, the color paint and everything needs to be maintained. We originally, prior to moving forward with that historical designation, we're looking at some additional cladding so that we obviously could modernize this space. For right now, we are not able to do that. And so we reviewed the color match samples essentially with the design advisory committee. We're gonna have to go and we have samples of the paint and we'll get a color match for that. So we'll basically just be maintaining exactly what is with some cleanup.
Well, my consideration is solely this, that assuming that the application receives approval, I think it's in the town interest to be supportive of a new business and provide as much support as we can to assure the success of the business.
Absolutely.
Will you be redoing all the roofs? Because they're probably in need of that, right?
Yes, so we will be redoing all of the flat roofs. The gabled roofs will be maintaining as is, as they were replaced less than 10 or 20 years ago. This is currently the face as you're approaching from the parking lot. Not too much of a change, but as you can see, this is where you will see the main entrance for the venue, and not too much has changed other than that. And this is the easterly view from the railroad. One thing to note is that the signage in this package is still in progress. As we know from the previous comments that Meg spoke to, the site lighting was an open item that came from the Design Advisory Committee. And a second open item is the monument and tenant signage. So because we are limited with the attachments per the historic designation, we're currently waiting to get some additional feedback on that prior to making any further design decisions, but we'll be resubmitting at that time. And this is just the final view. So again, you can see here the new gable roof, but the authentic nature of the building as it currently stands is what we're going to maintain. We're really just cleaning up any of the brick or CMU that needs to be replaced. We are replacing the windows and the doors, and that was taken into account in the acoustic study for the new windows as well. And I believe that's it with my part, Meg. Thank you.
Just one last question. I think I read that the windows are going to be all replaced, right, with modern aluminum windows? Is that your intent here?
Yes, so we want to replace for durability. So currently all of the windows are wood and are in really rough shape, are single pane glass. So we're planning on replacing with triple pane aluminum, and per the requirements for the historic, the detailing will all be the same. It'll be maintained. So prior to the ordering of any replacement windows, we'll have someone come out and survey to make sure that everything is up to stuff.
That would be low E glazing?
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, because I live in a historic home, these are 12 over 12. This era of buildings did not have 12 over 12s.
It looks like some of the windows were replaced at one time.
Yeah, it's kind of a mishmash there, but so I'm just curious
There's some
how you
oddball
deal with
windows,
that, yeah.
For sure. Like this little one up here. It's like a single pane with no, I don't even know how to describe it. It's a no divided and then a 2 pane. So someone got crafty at one point. But we'll have to maintain exactly how they currently are.
Okay, all right.
They mentioned for the Stillman building, when we renovated that,
Yeah.
the school building, they all had 12 over 12.
They did.
But that was original to the building, and we had to go back and put single pane.
Right.
And the reason was, those old Yankees were smart, they figured it was gonna cost too much money to continue to paint them, so they paid extra money to get big sheets of glass, were expensive. But that's what we put in the building, but it's not the original, but that's what it really was. And they changed them like 50 to 100 years later to 12 over 12, because they were cheap.
Yeah, so we'll be maintaining whatever they're currently
All
is.
right.
Thank you.
All right, so that, Aaron's portion of the presentation really is all we had prepared for tonight. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any additional information.
Let me start with,
Yeah.
just pretty obvious question. Our town engineering department did a very thorough review of you got a lot of information that you submitted to them. And I don't know how many items they identified, but they identified quite a few. I went through most of them today quickly. Some of them are easy to resolve, some of them not so easy to resolve. Have you looked at all those? Are you guys in sync with that, or do you still have to work it through?
Yeah, I'll have Seamus come up and look. I do have a copy, yeah. There's like the wetlands ones and then
Yeah, so I went through, the wetlands comments and the planning and zoning comments today.
Yep.
And, started drafting my response letter. It was thorough, which I appreciate. I don't know if I agree with some of them. Obviously, there are some very obvious ones that I had wrong. Freudian slip, Butler Street. Butlers are the applicants, not the street. That's Beaver Road. So that was item number 2. Item number 1 is wetlands. Contact MDC, which we haven't done yet, which we will do. Anything with MDC we'll have to address. Lighting plan is number 4, which we've provided. 5 is actually in both the wetlands and the PZC one. It's the 11-foot wide travel width proposed from the western exit driveway is too narrow for one way. So in the regulations, it does say 11 feet is the travel aisle for a parking lot and for a driveway. So we're maintaining what's in the regulations. So I'm not sure.
Can you increase it? Do you have the space to increase it?
We can without losing spaces, I don't think we can increase it.
Right.
So the 11, I guess that's something that I should discuss with the commission. The 11 feet is what we're maintaining. It's a one-way access. It's per the regulation. He made that comment in both the PZC and the wetlands review letters. So I'm not sure what the commission's pleasure is on that. Personally, I think 11 feet, if you're just driving, it's a one-way lane. That's plenty of space. A parking space is 10 feet wide. If you're just exiting, it's 11 feet and a short stretch of the drive. It meets the regulations. It opens up at the street. So once it gets past the building, it's 22 feet wide, I believe. So 11 feet to me does not seem problematic. My response is that it meets the regulation. It's our intent. We don't want to lose spaces, so that's why we have that. We can come back to that one if we want.
My concern on that issue is people walking as well, people are exiting out at the same time or crossing across the street for parking reasons. Seemed wide enough to me.
Okay.
So we'll leave that in your hands.
Just site plan.
Gotcha. Well, so that's a good question. Let me see.
He's talking about in here, right? Is he talking about this?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
this whole stretch from this arrow, out to this point here is 11 feet. There's 11 feet of travel width. Then the parking spaces, the parallel parking spaces are just that. They're off of that. but the 11 feet, so right in this location here, I guess we could widen it a little bit here if people are trying to exit here. We do have these steps that come down to a walkway now. And right now, this pavement, we are cutting back a little bit of the pavement in there. If we were to kind of maintain some of that pavement, I guess we could make it a little bit wider in that area. I'm not sure if that helps. I think we're maintaining it on this edge here, so it's just if we can get it a little bit wider here, but I'm not sure how much benefit that provides to us. It doesn't get us another walkway. If we do if we lose this parking space, we could potentially have an a walkway that gets us out to the corner, but that's losing a parking space. We go to 124, which maybe that's insignificant. Maybe we'd prefer a walkway rather than a parking space there.
I think the point that is important here is that our engineering department is very thorough. I think we have an excellent engineering department, and we really don't want to be in the business of overriding what our engineering department thinks is the best for the town. So I understand you're asking us, hey, what do you guys think? Is 11 good enough? I'm not going to say it is or isn't. I would prefer that you work out your opinions with the town engineer, and if he agrees, that's fine. If he doesn't, then I think you guys need to work it out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with him. I just say if it met the regulation.
Yeah, I understand.
That's where we came from.
Yeah.
6, I agree with him. We can eliminate the dead end space. I'm putting a one-way path, 15 feet wide, by eliminating 2 of the spaces. So we're losing 2 spaces there. 7 is the accessible parking spaces. I'll just talk to him about the accessible route to get there.
Okay.
Purpose of the bike path. This was something that Mr. Elder and I, we as a team discussed early on of creating that bike path, kind of to nowhere, but. Can you point to it? Yeah, sorry. So the bike path that's shown here that we're striping, his comment is, what's kind of the point of that? And it's a bike path to nowhere, which we understand, but that was in an early discussion, we said we should have a bike path. So, I don't know. It is a bike path to nowhere, I agree, unless we were to connect to the neighbor's property, and maybe we can go further. It's one of those, sometimes you're required to build a sidewalk.
I was wondering, I'm surprised.
On either side of you? You gotta start it somewhere?
Oh, so I think I was wondering the same thing where it came from. I think it's a good idea. I don't think it was me.
Okay.
But I don't think, I think my understanding, and again, my understanding is that there's a concept that's being discussed and been proposed that there would be a bike trail, and is currently used apparently by cyclists who come up, is it Spring Street? This is already used as a cut through for cyclists. It would be interesting, we could kind of, Aaron, do you know?
Yeah, I talked about having the bike rack. We did mention that at one point, so maybe that's what
I will say
set it up.
I don't think it's a bad, I actually I like the idea of the bike rack. I like the idea of the EV chargers. I think it sort of goes with the vibe, if you will, of the whole facility. But no, I don't, I mean, I did have the same concern, and I did say, you have it appears you have you have a designed and assigned bike path, but it is going to go in potentially to the other site, which is not. But again, that's off-site, and if cyclists are already using that, I also wouldn't want the commission to start getting into considering off-site improvements. We're looking at a site plan for this site, so I think the bike path is nice. I also think it gives you additional pedestrian access of the entire parking lot. Whether or not it's used for cyclists, it allows people who park on that eastern side of the lot to walk safely outside of the travel ways to get to the building.
Maybe we can just call it a path
Sure.
instead of a bike path.
Yeah, I think we all like it. I guess calling it a bike path to nowhere doesn't really help. We'll just call it a path.
There is a concept plan that I believe the town has been discussing pursuing of having a bike path along the shared right-of-way of the railroad, which is a long time away, but
I believe it came from, there's a committee or something in the town of Wethersfield regarding the bikes in the town, and I think that's where that idea had come from. Obviously, the path was left over from when we were in talks with the adjacent building owner for the parking spaces over on Beaver Street rather than the 214 Church Street, so that's kind of where the difference is.
Is that paved or gravel? What is it?
Paved,
as proposed.
paved walk, paved right now?
I mean, as
This is-
proposed or existing today?
This here
It's
is,
there now?
No,
Yeah.
are you asking what's,
As proposed, I mean, just, I thought, wouldn't you be better off looking at grass? Or you
Or just
might
keep
pave
it
more
up.
stuff, I don't
well,
know.
it's currently paved. We're actually cutting back the pavement, but we're only cutting it to a certain point, and then we're gonna stripe it. So it's already paved, we're just striping it.
Aren't you
Oh,
gonna
okay.
replace that pavement, or are you gonna leave it the way it is for now?
We're planning to re-mill, I guess.
Yes, you can, yeah.
Reclaim that, yeah.
A lot of money. Okay, fair enough.
Can I also say, just before we go, so I just looked, the property maps, and I actually thought for a while that maybe the property owner also owned that small lot that is the constraint on the 11-foot on the northwest corner. That's CL&P, probably now Eversource, but the property shows it's Connecticut Light and Power that owns that. And I'm not suggesting, you know, I don't want to spend your money for you in easements, but there might be just a conversation about the ability to, I don't know if that.
Sure.
I just want to point that out, that I don't think that's a building lot. It shows as surplus area, but.
Gotcha. I'll just breeze through the rest of them. So, recommend installing a dedicated 5-foot wide bike lane. I think we have the concrete walkway here. Maybe if we want to make that a little bit wider, I don't want to put another walkway right next to a walkway. So if we need to make that a little bit wider to provide access for the bikes, we're showing this connection here from the bike racks to be able to, to be able to get out to Church Street. So maybe make, maybe you can make that walkway a little bit wider. Identify the EV equipment. So we've added that. There's a detail for it. Define the limits and types of all new curbs.
Excuse me,
Added more labels.
the EV charging units, are they generic or are they Tesla?
That's a good question.
Type 2.
They're generic. As of, the plan is generic.
Didn't we just go through that, we need 10%?
Yeah.
So you need like 12 of those, right?
I think there's 14
Isn't it? I
shown.
just see
Yeah.
5, okay.
Where,
Although that's for, I think that might only be
Oh,
for
around the
residential.
bottom.
The EV are all right here.
Okay, I was thinking about that top left.
Right there.
Fire marshals don't like them near buildings because you can't put them out. So they like them furthest away from the buildings, actually.
So if you don't have an EV car, those are basically all wasted, so you're gonna lose, well,
There's actually a state law against the shared use of those spaces. It just came before us.
Oh, you
You
mean,
just lost 12 spaces.
Yep.
so you can't use them, period.
Yes, it's an infraction.
There's,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly, but.
it's a hybrid.
I think one of my comments just on that was that we have allowed, so the requirement for 10% is in new commercial development. I'm not sure this meets the definition of new.
I wouldn't even bring it up, forget
Yeah,
about it.
but I would say, when we start talking about the numbers, I thought that a fair way to figure it out would be, what is the current penetration of EV sales in a given year? So in 2024, 2025, of all the cars sold in Connecticut, how many of them were EVs? And that would give you a rough percentage of what could be considered accessory, right? So what is the likelihood of people showing up in an electric vehicle?
What is that gonna do? Then we just have a whole night, we talked about 10% of our parking has to be.
Yes. But to the point of, if, just full circle, so right, we know that people in a non-EV or hybrid vehicle can park in those, so those spots are off limits to the rest of the cars. But therefore, to come up with a reasonable number as an accessory use, we should figure out what the percentage is of people driving EVs.
Well, again, what does that got to do with it? I thought the state law said 10% of our parking spaces.
Of new commercial development or in multifamily developments with over 30 units. That,
Other than that, we can do whatever we want then. On this, we can do whatever we want.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, so if you don't need, unless you really want the 14, if you don't need the 14, you might want to consider it.
Okay, gotcha. That's good, thank you.
I think it becomes a constraint because people will not park there. You know, so if you don't need that much, you gotta consider cutting back.
Okay, no, we agree.
except if it's for office use, you know,
Oh, right.
it's gonna have the offices, there's people parking during the day might use them, maybe shut them off at night, I don't know.
I don't think you can shut
Or make them only restricted during the, yeah, exactly.
Well, I think since we're talking about EVs, I think one of the comments I had, the building official brought it to my attention that the new Connecticut building code requires an accessible path from an EV charger to the building. I did talk to Aaron about that, and so I don't know if the code means that just one of the accessible spots to the east can be an EV charger, but I defer that there is a comment that building code requires an accessible path.
Meaning what? Say that again?
The new Connecticut building code requires an accessible path from EV chargers to the floor, and I could get my terms wrong, the finished floor of the building. So there needs to be a continuous, someone who.
So you can't cut across the parking lot?
Correct. They need to be able to get to they need to somehow get to the sidewalk, and then the sidewalk needs to connect to the first finished floor of the building.
This seems a little bit counter to the whole idea that fire marshals don't like them near buildings.
And, well, so why shouldn't everyone have an accessible path to a building? I don't know, but that's a comment from the building official, so we can
So if
debate
you have
it.
an EV vehicle, you have a special issue about
Do we
walking?
need the 10%?
That-
We don't.
No, it's just so that if you are, like, for example, a wheelchair user and you have an
Okay,
EV.
what if, no, she says it's an EV vehicle.
Yeah, so if you're a wheelchair user with an EV, then like having them all the way over there in the
What if
parking
you have a regular
lot.
car? Don't you have the same issue? I don't know why EV versus a regular car is different.
So I do,
Anyways,
yeah, I have one question, David. Did the building official say if we would be required to have 10% EV in this?
No,
Or he-
no, that's not the comment.
Yeah.
His comment was only that.
If we do have it,
If you're gonna have EV charging
okay.
spaces, those spaces, and I had a question back to him is what if you split it? What if you have, some as shown
Right.
on the location and you have one or two up by the other accessible?
Okay.
Does that meet the building requirement? And I didn't hear it's a
because-
brand new,
Because this is not a new commercial development, but a redevelopment, the building official isn't going to apply that state building code for 10%.
but he's not applying the 10%.
The 10% is not going to matter.
10% is a land use code.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're not applying that 10% either.
Right.
but the accessible,
But if we do have them, we need it to be accessible.
Correct.
Got it. All right, so we can, I think, modify this a little bit. Put one right there.
Yeah. Put, like, just a couple right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what Seamus is thinking about is potentially, instead of moving them up to close where these handicap spaces are, because we have the accessible route here where you're seeing this concrete here, that's already accessible, so we could potentially put, maybe we don't have 14 or whatever,
Yeah.
but we have a couple up here. And then we have the accessible route.
Yeah.
Because you gotta bring power to all those, so it's
Yeah.
gonna cost a lot of money for.
That's why I didn't want to put one up here
Yeah.
and 10
Because I
down
remember
here.
with the Tesla, they had to be in a row altogether,
But that's what he said.
right? They had to have all 12 together,
Yes.
it's cheaper, yeah.
right? But if you break them up, it's gonna be a lot more expensive.
Anyways, we're giving you some feedback. I think you got some flexibility there, and I don't believe you're constrained to 14 in that spot.
Got it, thank you.
Sorry, if you said more.
I figured I'd just go through them so
Yeah.
you know that they're
Yeah.
very minor,
Yeah.
and we can address them and.
Yeah, finish up, yeah.
Sure. Sidewalk east of the parking lot should be flush. It actually already is, so we agree. Define limits and types of all new curbs, that's fine. I've already added some more notes on there, just so it's clear, crystal clear. Verify the type of curbing, west of the building, that's obvious. I've added a note already. Indicates new driveway aprons are to remain as is, which we have. He mentioned that the western exit lane should be narrower here, so we're showing this pavement right here being eliminated. Install do not enter signs near Church Street. This discussion I'll have with him is I'm just gonna ask if we can paint that because there's no room to put a sign on our property without putting it in the right of way. I don't wanna ask the town if we can put one in Church Street, so if we just paint it, if that's okay with the arrows. Define the limits of new sidewalks, no problem. 17 is something I'll discuss with him. It's not really anything big enough to discuss here. Indicating on the landscape plans what plantings are proposed for the 2 southern parking islands, so the landscape architect will address that. Provide volume and page labels from town land records for the leased area along the eastern drive of the survey plan. That's just this here, so we'll have the surveyor provide that. And the last one is confirm that approval is granted for all improvements proposed within the Helco right-of-way.
Where is that
I
exactly?
don't know, I had
So
a question.
Helco's the old CLMP name.
Okay. So we aren't proposing any improvements over here
I think
yet.
it's the aerial, right? I think he's assuming the aerial right away of the overhead power lines. That's I read that too. That's an assumption. We should confirm, but that was my understanding, is that we are building an elevator tower right here. We're going to extend the roof. Could be wrong, but
Gotcha.
you can see on the maps, there's a pretty wide aerial right away of the overhead power lines.
But otherwise, that was it for the planning and zoning comments.
Well, it sounds like you got a lot of it covered.
Yeah,
You want to just discuss this 11-foot with him, probably.
exactly. I think that's
All
the
right.
only thing that'll have be any substantial change.
The one question I just have is actually about the parking agreement with 214, which is there a crosswalk there?
Yeah, so there is not a crosswalk there, and Seamus and I were talking about it, because I thought somebody might ask us how people are gonna get across. Let me just get that area.
'Cause there's a stop sign for the railroad track, right? But like, people aren't gonna walk on the railroad track.
Right,
Where it's-
there's a stop sign up here. Seamus, you wanna talk about, the light we were.
Sure. So when Meg and I were looking at this, where's this cursor?
Yeah.
There's a light pole right here, and there's another light pole just on the other side of the railroad tracks. This little white line that you see here under the cursor, that's a walkway for the property that goes right to the edge of the street. And there's a street light right over the top of it. So we're thinking that a crosswalk from the edge of their walkway across the street, essentially to right here is our walkway, and that'll get them on our property, and it's well lit with the light that's already there, with the walkway that's already there right to the street. So I think it's pretty clear and pretty easy to get to that point.
Is that something that you'd like us to include? We'd obviously have to talk to the town about it, because it's.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking to the engineer, I don't know if
Yeah.
that's who I don't know who you talk to. I don't know if you guys
Yeah,
know.
the engineering department would be right. Okay,
I had a quick question.
yes.
I noticed in your plan at the main entrance to the office building, there's no drop-off. And you know people are going to drop people off and walk on the grass and make their own path. Is there a reason why that wasn't done? You look at your site plan, the sidewalk goes from the handicap to the main entrance. But the question I had was, if someone's coming in and say they want to drop somebody off for an appointment, they're just going to walk across your grass and go, and, I mean, is there a reason why?
Like a pull-off area or something? Are you talking,
I'm saying, if I drive in,
you come in here,
yeah, and say I have a person who has an appointment, and I drop them off, they're going to walk right across the grass to the sidewalk. Is there any reason why a sidewalk was not put in for drop-off, or is that something that wasn't calculated in the traffic pattern?
Yeah, we didn't, so that's not something.
Yeah, no, I just know, as you know, people are going to take
the lazy.
path of least resistance.
So
And
the
they-
last version of this plan was very much like that, where we had parallel parking spaces and a walkway right next to it, and the fire marshal said, let's not put any parking there. We don't want it to block an emergency vehicle to get into the site. So they didn't want parking in there.
I just noticed it and, thought about,
We could ask him if a loading
Yeah.
spot, like we could have a potential little, we could ask him.
Yeah.
there's no,
Little bump out.
Little bump out, yeah.
The main entrance, people can be the back, right? Employees,
Yeah,
workers.
for let me go to the floor plan.
Yeah, where is the main entrance?
I mean, they're gonna park and walk into the back of the building, right? Most people.
There's one on the side there. and-
the
Or
main
side,
entrance
whatever
is
it
Yeah,
there.
this is the main entrance here.
So they'll park in the back
The
and walk down the
offices.
back.
Yeah, they'd come down the sidewalk and come in here.
So like you say, if he drops off, they drop off right in front of that little door.
Yeah. But I don't know if there's an issue with the traffic pattern. I just thought about it when
We
I
have
saw
the
the
width- I think
the
we have the
handicap
width
and the
there.
path.
Yeah, so it's 20 feet wide right now. The fire marshal asked for it to be 20 feet wide for that emergency vehicle to possibly put out outriggers if he had to. But in terms of the use, the office use, I guess office is just general. when I'm thinking a drop-off, I'm thinking more of like medical appointments or something like that, not like a business office. If I'm going to the office, I'm going to park and walk into my office. If I'm going to a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment, getting dropped off makes sense. Do you know what the intent is?
I think the drop-off would be much for the office as well.
Yeah, so what you're using this for, or hope to use it for, is a business office, is that correct?
Church Street door probably wouldn't be used.
Yeah.
Right? Just maybe
Yeah.
looks. Yeah.
Ceremonial.
So I don't think the uses are going to dictate many drop-offs, but that's something.
And I just
Yeah.
noticed,
All right, any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question, and I also have a comment preliminary to that. As you can kind of see from some of the dialogue and conversations, questions have taken place, you're likely to find some challenges relating to conflicts among regulations. Ones that come to my mind are potential conflicts between handicap accessibility requirements for people with disabilities and the historic requirements for facilities historic facilities that are under rehabilitation or renovation. And so you're going to have some challenges and workarounds there. There are usually solutions to those problems, but they may present some issues for you to be sensitive to and to work around. The second, or the question I have, is kind of both for the council, for the applicant, and for Dave, our town planner, and it relates to the regulation in our zoning regs 5.6 exceptions for business redevelopment. And that it relates to the standards that are found in that regulation, which run from standard A to standard E. The question is that if we must modify or waive one or more of the requirements of the regulations to allow for the redevelopment, or the modifications that you're proposing in the application of the regulations, does it require the commission to make a finding that each and all of the criteria in A through E must be addressed and found to be acceptable? Or does it require the committee or the commission to look at them holistically and not make a specific finding, but finding in general that that the requirements under that section are found to be proper and orderly? I'll leave it for you to, Dave, to start out, and if there are comments from the council for the applicant, I'd be obliged to hear those as well.
I read this as may modify one or more, right? So,
well, one or more of the requirements of the regulations. But when such modifications, and then there are 5 criteria, A through E.
As your staff in these matters, when there is an interpretation necessary in the regulations, it would be the commission's charge to determine if it is one or all. If my opinion is that the commission should review each and every single one of them.
Make us findings specific to each?
Well, not necessarily, but I think, no, I don't. I think you should at least review them.
That's why I said look at them holistically.
Yeah.
You may look at them individually.
I think you should consider
but apply them holistically, or whether or there has to be a specific finding relating to each. That's that's the quandary I'm in.
What does the commission think? I mean, my opinion is holistic is best.
Right, yeah.
That's my opinion.
Well, it's not so much, I'm more concerned about the legal technicalities of it. Because this is a legal ruling that we are about to make.
I would actually say also, we're not sure that we're waiving anything.
Well, I was just going to say what.
No,
Yeah, we don't know that we're modifying it. I think first and foremost, we should understand if we are waiving and modifying something, that we should know what those are, and then revisit that. I brought up that, well, I'll leave it at that. I think we should, right now, the applicant hasn't asked us to identify or consider any waivers other than what I believe they're asking for, which is a recognition of their excellence in design for the low-impact development for stormwater, which would allow them to, request a 15% reduction. That's the only, well, actually, this is probably a good exercise to go through. I think the applicant's asking for us to recognize excellence in design for their LID, or low-impact development regulations. I think they're asking us to review and consider their shared parking analysis. And I think they're asking us to also consider their shared parking arrangement and agreement for an off-site property to be the three areas that I've heard where they're asking the commission to recognize those as part of their application.
And therefore, that modifies, any particular regulation that we have.
Well, those are specifically identified in the regulations specific to parking outside of any rehabilitation or reuse of an existing site.
And otherwise, these are all individually still uses that are allowed within that, just except for.
Actually, that's a good point. The only one that
We don't need to go with 5, 6 anyway.
Correct.
Because,
Not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I
I
think.
didn't see any particular, waiver or specific request of modifying regulations in here, but I thought it was worthwhile to bring the issue up to address if it in any way applied. Now, if 5.6 doesn't apply, then it's a moot point.
Yeah, and I think just so we're clear, there are a bunch of tools in your toolbox regarding parking, and I think that's where it maybe gets a little confused. I think you could go under 5.6, and based on if you've made a finding in those factors, you could waive the parking and say they only need 125 or whatever. You could do that. I think what made more sense for me was the way we presented it was going under the shared parking analysis. I felt like that was more scientific, to be quite honest. Sometimes with parking waivers, it's a little bit arbitrary. You're just waiving a certain number. So we felt like it was more scientific to come in with the shared parking agreement. And I felt like the commission would feel more comfortable, quite honestly, with that. And so we did get that shared parking analysis to say, hey, if you guys agree that we're allowed to have the shared parking analysis, because it's you may grant that, you don't have to, then we have to at least provide that peak number, which was the 129. So I couldn't have come in here with just the 125 and said, oh, approve this shared parking. Then I would need a waiver or something else. But so the avenue we're really pursuing right now is we want the commission to basically accept our shared parking analysis, to agree that we have this agreement across the street
For 3 years.
for 3 years, and maybe there's some other condition that needs to be attached to the approval to make sure that there always is X number of parking, or that we come back in a certain number of years to sort of confirm that it's working. And I think the other avenue was going down this like 15% waiver, which is for excellence in design. So we made the decision that we felt like the shared parking made the most sense with this use, based on especially the real divergence in peak hours of operation. I think if I had had a different mix of uses, the shared parking might not have been the best approach. But I think in this case, where we had such opposite peak hours, it really made the most sense. So you have a couple different, honestly, like 3 ways I think you could approve what we're asking for. I think the one we've presented is this shared parking analysis with the agreement that some people can be off-site. We felt like that made the most sense.
Following the shared parking procedures allows us not to have to make a decision about modifying any
Correct.
regulation.
Correct. And I think it makes sense for this application, might not make sense for others, but I felt like in this one, it made the most sense. So yeah, I don't think you would need to go to 5.6. I guess you could if you wanted to, but.
I mentioned it because it has found its way in both of the applications we are, have reviewed or been in discussion tonight, even though it seems tangential at this point with both.
I think it's important just to recognize you have that available to you along this corridor where you do have existing sites and existing buildings.
And we definitely used it before. I know when we did the Borden project, not the new building, but remember that building on the corner of Mill Street? There were some parking spaces. Remember it was the old bank drive-through in the front, and we converted some of that to parking. That was one of the things you guys waived. Instead, we weren't allowed to have parking in front of the building setback line, but you allowed us to have it because there was already pavement there. That was like one of the times we applied that. And you sort of said, you know what, let's waive that requirement that you're not allowed to have parking in front of the building. So that's like an example.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? All right, anyone in the audience like to speak? Please, come on up and speak to us.
Unaccustomed as I am. Hi, I'm Sharon Cutts, 15 Deerfield Road. My backyard is right in the middle of the parcel, so where the building ends and the parking lot begins, where your handicap spaces will shine their headlights directly into my bedroom. So, I'm coming at this backwards because there's a lot at stake here. I've lived here for over 20 years. My business has been here over 20 years. Our cul-de-sac really of a neighborhood is close. We have a diverse group of people there. And of the last 3 proposals for this parcel, I would say, you know, this one is the best. I appreciate you've taken some of the neighborhood into account, but I didn't avail myself of the packet, so I'm sure there's more I could educate myself about beyond what you've presented. But my biggest concern, is there going to be a rooftop patio? I heard patio, but rooftop was somewhere. That's fantastic. And it's not going to be a brewery, right? There was a newspaper article somewhere that talked about that. Okay, so those are good things. I would say that a planting plan for the neighborhood would be more than
Could you address the commission, please?
I'm so sorry. Like I said, I'm new at this. So the planting plan for me is much more than just to decorate. It's privacy, it's sound, it's aesthetics. The previous plan, the previous people who were trying to do something with the property, we even got so far as to discussing how tall the trees were going to be. They got planted on the east side, and it didn't look like there was anything about trees. This was just decoration. And so I was really hoping to see how tall the trees were going to be. They got planted along the side by the railroad tracks, because for us, you know, the train only goes like twice or so a week, if that. It just feels like it abuts pretty much the parking lot. So that's my backyard.
So your concern is that if we go back to the site plan, maybe, can we flip back to the site plan so she can point to it more carefully so we can understand?
Yes.
So where those handicap parking spaces are, your property's directly
Yes.
across from that?
Yeah, it's the largest backyard. It's one of the largest ones in Old Wethersfield, and we entertain there. We've had church groups there. And to think about, you know, bands playing there till midnight. I did hear that the decibel level report, but I'm interested to make sure it's not cumulative or additive.
And the trees that are planted there are decorative, or are they screening?
Crabapple.
They're not really screening trees for headlights.
They're they're
All right, so,
deciduous.
I mean, this is a good point. I mean, obviously, you're going to get lights shining into your backyard that you didn't have before in a continuous basis. So it's something you need to consider.
And you, while you're here,
Yeah.
are you looking for an evergreen type screening or versus a fence, or just not decorative trees?
I'm
not trying to put you on the spot.
I just leave it at this. You know the concern, you now know the neighbor. I think you should offline discuss what's best for both of you.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. So no rooftop, that's great, because that also would have had a problem for us with looking down into the yard. I was concerned about sound when those large garage door-looking doors were open. Even though it's facing away from my property, it still feels like that would let out a whole lot of sound from the venue. And it looks like a great place. It looks like a place I would like to go hang out. And the doors being open would be fantastic in general, but it does seem like then what happens with the noise issue?
Yeah, I'm not sure that the venue's going to have open overhead doors. I think it's the windows where most of the noise is going to come out of. I think that's what they said.
Yeah.
You want to clarify that for her, please?
Yeah, so those overhead doors that we had, that was associated with the restaurant. So the venue does not have any, the music venue has no overhead doors. That would just be when the restaurant's open, and I think that closes at, what is it? 10.
And that's when you had your highest amount of people in the parking lot, or up to the highest amount on a Saturday.
The shared analysis, yeah.
So that would be a thought to consider. Lighting, I didn't understand where the lighting thing landed. Right now, there's a couple of very annoying lights coming out directly into our backyard. So if there's going to be a plan where they're much more focused and energy efficient and all that good stuff, and we would appreciate that.
We were submitted the plan basically today, so we really haven't had a chance to review it yet. That's one of the things we asked for. That needs to be reviewed.
Okay. Is it going to be a smoke-free property? Is it vaping going to be allowed? Is there going to be smoke?
I'll give you a chance to come up rather than go back and forth.
I think those are the office space. I noticed a lot of small offices. Are they designed to be leased or rented out to individuals? Or is it going to be one insurance company? Is it going to be for people who, those, whatever you call those spaces where you can rent them for individuals who have to work from home sometimes, but then they really need an office? Or is it medical? Interested in that? And then, of course, there's the concerns about construction noises, but that would feel like getting ahead of ourselves if that's something I should be bringing up yet or not.
That's appropriate.
Yeah, it's appropriate.
The construction noise is an appropriate
Just the
question?
duration, and, if, I think we understand the question is to be, correct me if I'm wrong, that if this were to be approved and if they start doing construction, what would the hours be? Would they be working 7 days a week, 6 days a week? Would they be starting at 7 a.m. and working till 9 p.m.? Those are questions that we would generally ask as well, so it's good to bring it up.
And we have had the experience being in the neighborhood for as long as we have, where there have been extended periods of people being there before 7 o'clock when they're practicing their trucks backing up and emptying dumpsters. We'd like to avoid that as much as possible, so even though if they say the construction starts at 7 a.m., they get there early, then the diesel engines are going for a lot longer than that, so then we're woken up at 6 or 7, earlier than 7 o'clock on a Saturday. But also, progress is progress, and if there's a shorter enough period of time where this thing can be accomplished and it's to everybody's good, then we want to support it. If it's not, then, I won't be the only one sitting here from the neighborhood, as has happened in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you
Anything
for your
else?
time. That's it for
All
now.
right, thank you. Would you like to respond to some of those?
Hi, I'm John Butler, owner of Commercial Development. I'm the GC on the project. And our plans are for work hours, we're going to work from 7 a.m. till 4 p.m. each day. We would like to work some Saturdays because we're going to be behind schedule a little bit, but we'll keep the noise down. I agree with her comment about dumpster companies. They love to come early in the morning before there's any traffic. We'll see if we can get him to come a little bit later in the morning so it doesn't interrupt you guys. As far as the lighting on the building, you're right, they are bright on your side right now. We are working on the plan. We're going to reduce the lighting for that, of course. And as far as noise, there's some things we just can't stop from making noise, like when we're doing the site work and all of that. But we'll keep you guys in mind when we're working there and try to make it to a minimum.
There are 5 properties, residents there that might need a buffer of some type of shrubbery. Would you consider doing something there on that whole east side and the railroad side to satisfy nighttime lighting, especially in the winter time?
I mean, luckily on that side, we're not doing a ton of work, right? The exterior, we're not doing a lot. We're doing just mostly masonry repairs, and that's not real noisy. The site work is going to be the loudest part along.
I'm thinking more lighting,
Oh, the lighting?
car lights that are facing and going out.
That's something that we can definitely consider. I know at one point we were talking about more like evergreen trees, because we're aware that there's going to be acoustic concerns. So that's definitely something that we'll work with our landscape engineer for.
Since light pollution was one of the issues that just come up with, I trust your lighting plan, which I haven't had a chance to review yet myself. But I trust your lighting plan has the hours in which the lights are on and in operation and off. And that should be, I think, hopefully would help in the relationship with the person that's just spoken before us.
Yeah, that came up during the Design Advisory Committee review as well. This plan that you'll see, the lighting plan, is the first pass, so obviously any comments that there are will take into consideration. I know for safety, we will have site lighting all night, but obviously it will not be like a runway. Yeah, so a lot of the lights on the site and the building will be dimmable and on timers. To answer your question about the office, if I may. So the office is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Regis. It's a company that's similar to co-working, kind of what you were talking about, but it's rented out in a membership form. So either a large company can kind of rent offices for their individuals, or like we could go and rent an office, but it's something that's more long-term rather than like a new people there every day type place. So there will be 24/7 access for those members. There'll be key cards, so everything will be secured. And again, we'll have the site lighting for safety, but it will be staffed like a normal office building. But it's just traditional, you bring your laptop to go work. I think that, the question regarding the vaping and smoking, we have not discussed that with the building owner yet. We know that there's probably going to, because Connecticut is a legal state, there will be likely some interest in having it as a smoke area, but if that is the route that the owner wants to go, we could work on creating kind of designated pockets on the site away from the residential space, probably closer to the venue. But yeah, we'll look into that. We'll ask. And I think
Duration of construction? Do you have an estimate for the duration of construction?
So the owner signed some leases that are a little aggressive. We're trying to get the first venue, the music area, sometime in August, September. And then the cafe will probably be November. And then the shared office space, they would like to be in the first quarter of '26. So like 1 year for the entire project, which is aggressive.
Just all of it?
I believe so.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. All right. I think we're, any more questions? I think we're pretty much questioned out here.
Okay. And if you think of anything else, you can obviously pass it through the planner.
All right.
But we'll work to, I think we should have time to pull a response together that can maybe go out in the packets before next meeting, which I think is June 4th.
Right,
Does that sound right?
So we'll continue this meeting. Obviously, we have to continue this meeting. Yeah, we'll see you at the next,
Is that the next meeting, the 4th?
That was June 3rd.
June 3rd, that's right,
Okay.
the Tuesday. Yes, that's correct. The 4th is a Wednesday, yeah.
we have a motion to continue the meeting.
So moved?
Is there a second?
Second.
Does anybody want to discuss anything else before we vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
Thank
see you June 3rd.
Thank you.
All right, other business. Did anyone have a chance to take a look at that presentation?
Were you here for that?
Yeah. Actually, it's on the, they provided a link to us here, on number 4. The one area that was a little bit confusing to me, that they had like a speed bump somewhere. Tracy, do you remember where they were gonna put that speed bump?
Yeah, so, wasn't it, correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't it right on Marsh Street, kind of?
I'm not sure, that's what I'm asking. It was gonna be on Marsh Street?
Well, there was some talk about it, like, over, like on Marsh, I think it's Marsh Street, kind of between
The
the
raised
church and the
crosswalk.
houses. You know, like near the cemetery,
yeah.
the little parking lot.
Okay.
Between the churches. That's where I remember it, but I could be mistaken.
Okay, it wasn't clear to me, okay.
Can I just, so I'm going to look and see if I can find it on the plans, but was there a comment? Are we just asking to confirm if there was a raised crosswalk? Or are we?
Right. It wasn't clear to me where it was gonna go. and
Okay.
It didn't show up on one of the plans, so I'm just curious, is it gonna be there, and where is it, is the question.
Okay.
All right, minutes, May 6th, oh, wait a minute, we got 4. Or did I skip, no, I just read through that.
Well, yeah, so we have a question. So we did not have this on the agenda at the last meeting, so I wanted, just for good transparency and public process, have it on the agenda. My understanding, I put this on the agenda as an 8-24. You know, since then, I've learned that prior, and for many years now, there would be times where the town engineer and other staff would come and just present a project to the commission, whether it required an 8-24, sort of an informational purposes presentation without being an 8-24. So reading the statutes, it's not clear that you actually need to issue an 8-24 because there is no town council action. Generally, that's what demands the 8-24s before the town acquires, leases, sells, or abandons land. You get an 8-24 for the commission, from the Planning and Zoning Commission. In this case, there is no town council action necessary. So I wanted to just have that discussion. You do not need to do an 8-24, but you can for, if you'd like to. But again, we could also just consider what Derek came and presented as an for your situational awareness that this project is moving forward. And as you saw, they are still discussing different alignments along Marsh Street or potentially using property, leasing property to connect behind the Keeney Center. So
What's not clear to me, other than what we heard last time, what would the 8-24 review encompass?
for this particular project?
Basically, 824
Nothing, it's all,
review means that the commission would find, well, an affirmative vote would find that we find that there's no essential conflicts between our regulations and the proposed action.
yeah, correct, when I originally saw the proposal, that my thought was that, oh, this is a new multi-use trail, a new transportation mode within the town that would require an 8-24. But the reality is this is all within existing municipal right-of-way for the majority, and so therefore it is not required. So there's no action necessary, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'm fine with it just being an informational thing, and I'm glad to have been included in this. Questions, but I don't think we need to vote for that.
I concur.
I don't think we need an A24 myself. Anyone feel otherwise?
Let's
All
move
right.
on.
I'm not sure why we're talking about it now. We talked about it last week.
Well, okay, that's fine. Let's move on. I think we're set with
Yep.
that, Dave. All right. Minutes, is there a motion to accept May 26, 25 meeting?
There you go.
Second?
Nobody wanted it.
Tracy seconded.
Tracy? Okay. Dave?
Oh, raised crosswalk, it
Tracy.
is here.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I wasn't here, Mr. Chairman, so I abstain.
Okay. Public comments? I think we're set with that. Any correspondence, Dave?
No, sir.
Any staff reports?
Just that we are still, just be aware, we are still working on the plan of conservation and development. I have draft chapters, and sooner or later, that will be coming to you as a full completed draft, asking for you to review it, and then we'll need to set a public hearing. So,
Okay. Good. No applications on June 3rd other than the continuing ones, I guess, right, so far?
correct. We have one shed, I believe, one shed.
We still have
One
sheds.
accessory permit, yes. Yeah.
I thought we gave up that.
Well, not yet. I'm working on that. That'll be on the agenda too. I hope
All
to have,
sheds are.
I hope to have draft regulations that reflect what we discussed at our last meeting.
Motion to adjourn from someone?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right. Good night. All
Tracy, do you want to see where this is?